Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Among the gods and legends and myths, those gods should be considered subordinate gods that depended on some stronger gods. For example, the god of trees and god of thorns should be subordinate to the god of forests, who was subordinate to the goddess of nature. However, although they had low status among the gods, they were still true gods. After all, each one of them could easily kill a sanctuary powerhouse like Lin Li. In this hall, there were dozens of such subordinate level gods, which brought a great shock to Lin Li. The little skeleton didn't introduce much about them to Lin Li, and instead continued walking forward to take Lin Li to the other side. It was just like an indifferent prison warden, who simply ignored the wailing and roaring of the surrounding gods. Regardless of how glorious and authoritative they used to be, the little skeleton called the shots here now. Seeing the way the little skeleton was behaving, Lin Li naturally couldn't kick up a big fuss. Despite feeling shocked, he remained calm on the surface. As he reached the second floor of the mage tower, he discovered that apart from the gods that had been sealed, there were actually many more things that were extremely astonishing. For example, the ground was paved with crystals that were actually a type of magic material that had long become exhausted in Anral and appeared only in myths and legends. It was said that the gods had used it to build palaces. A fist-sized piece would release a massive amount of mana that was at the peak of the sanctuary level and contained extremely pure sky laws. There were also the pillars that were made of chaos adamantine, which was said to be a rare magical metal that was created with the condensed power of chaos. It could completely accommodate all the magical elements and laws. Although it didn't have powerful mana, it was definitely a top-grade magical weapon, or the best material for building the best magical weapons and props. The Stars of Fury, which Lin Li had been trying to find for a long time, contained an extremely important type of metal, and that was chaos adamantine. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars each contained a pure nomological power, and if the Stars of Fury didn't contain any chaos adamantine, it would probably be impossible for it to move their power. With the chaos adamantine, the Stars of Fury had the foundation to control the debris of the stars. Coupled with the special Divine Smith level mage, it had the ability to fully exert the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. In addition, the chaos adamantine had another powerful effect. It would greatly enhance the level of a magical weapon. When added in small doses during the latter's creation, it could allow a guru of forging to create a guru-level masterpiece. If Lin Li, who was also a guru of forging, could get his hands on some chaos adamantine, it would probably be possible for him to create a weapon that was near the level of an artifact. Lin Li did not pay attention to what the first level of the mage tower was like, because the sealed gods had given him a great visual impact, so much so that he didn't have the time to think about other things. However, when he reached the second level, he could already shell out some of his attention to observe the other items. Even though the gods, they were of a higher level. In fact, apart from the sealed gods, there weren't many rare items in the hall on the first floor. However, there were more than just gods on the second level. Apart from the rare magic materials that were extremely enticing to Lin Li, there were also many magical objects that seemed ordinary but contained terrifying power. For example, there was a wisp of fire element on the lamps. Once it was released, the skies would be all lit up, and it would be a piece of cake to burn the sky. Even a sanctuary powerhouse's domain world would be burned down to nothing once it came in contact with a spark. The ancient mirage sphere that had been sold at a high price during the recent auction turned into an ordinary decorative ornament here. Lin Li could even sense that each mirage sphere had given rise to a world on its own. If someone got their hands on it, it would be akin to having a world of their own. There was an hourglass used for timekeeping, which really didn't seem impressive, but it actually contained the condensed laws of time. If someone mastered its method of use, they would even be able to use it to reverse the laws of time and space within a certain range, which already concerned the power of the divine realm. It probably wouldn't be wrong to call it an artifact. It could be said that each drop of water and speck of dust in the mage tower contained a massive power. Even though Lin Li had always felt that he had seen a lot of the world, he felt like a country bumpkin entering a city when he was in the mage tower. After coming to Anral, Lin Li had explored plenty of ruins, from the Eternal Furnace to the Throne of Darkness, followed by Prince Bahir's mausoleum and the Sky Castle. The powerful magic props that he had harvested were enough to make anyone jealous. However, Lin Li still felt that he was too poor. Lin Li couldn't possibly stop to study those things, and could only continue moving up the stairs with the little skeleton. Of course, Lin Li was well aware that the mage tower was, more likely than not, left to him by the immortal king or Garesco. Hence, he didn't eagerly try to get those items. Lin Li followed the little skeleton up the first floor, second floor, and then the third. Gradually, Lin Li started to feel numb. To him, it was just like a prison for the gods, where the gods of the lowest level were housed on the first floor, and the gods on the higher floors were much stronger. Gradually, gods that were at the level of the god of bravery, such as the god of rivers, god of righteousness, and god of forests, appeared in front of Lin Li. The second-tier gods were several times, or even more than 10 times more powerful, compared to the subordinate gods below. They were already powerful existences that could establish their own divine kingdoms. 4 gods. A divine kingdom was not just like a backyard or garden, nor was it just meant to serve as a place of worship. It was also an extremely powerful weapon that was both offensive and defensive. A divine kingdom mattered to a god as much as a magical domain mattered to a mage. It was completely a difference in realm. However, even then, gods that could create divine kingdoms were still confined within this mage tower like prisoners. When the little skeleton and Lin Li passed by them, they howled and begged incessantly for someone to release them, just like prisoners who had been imprisoned for a long time. Lin Li could not say that he was not interested in those gods, but he didn't find them as rare as he did at first. After the initial shock, he seemed to have been more enticed by the various decorations and arrangements in the tower. Since the mage tower could seal and suppress so many gods, it naturally had an impressive setup. First, it was the Mageth that suppressed all gods, which was similar to the Mageth that suppressed the ancient god of light. It was absolutely a good reference for Lin Li. Apart from that, there was also a large number of Mageths that were used for defense and attacking, as well as some illusion arrays. They were all Mageths that were at the divine smith level, which bedazzled Lin Li. Although the Mageths were powerful, it wouldn't be easy for Lin Li to completely master them. He could only consider it an eye-opener regarding what divine smith level Mageths were like so that he could study them in detail in the future. However, although Lin Li could not master these Mageths, he could also tell the amazing aspects thereof, especially with the one that was suppressing the gods. It actually had the ability to constantly extract the divine power of all deities. Not only did it treat the gods as a monosource, but also borrowed the nomological power that the gods mastered. After discovering this, Lin Li couldn't help but be amazed by how generous the immortal king was. Not only did he imprison the gods, he even treated them as slaves and experimental products. The level of the gods that were suppressed got higher and higher as Lin Li continued to explore the place with the little skeleton. When he reached the 11th floor of the mage tower, Lin Li was already used to seeing gods, and there was probably nothing that could shock him any further. However, when he saw the items on that floor, Lin Li was once again astonished to the point that his jaw dropped. It turned out that the ones being suppressed on the 11th floor were dozens of ancient gods. Ancient gods were different from ordinary gods. Ancient gods were born from chaos and had the inherent power of origin. The other gods generally became gods through the study of certain laws, which they eventually mastered. Compared to the ancient gods, they were worlds apart. For example, the ancient god of light had an innate mastery of light. Although there were gods that could become the so-called god of light through the study of the laws of light, they were a notch lower compared to the ancient god of light. It could be said that among the various gods, even the powerful main god wouldn't be able to fight the ancient god of light easily, and would be innately subject to the suppression of the ancient gods. Lin Li initially thought that it was quite a big deal for the immortal king to be able to suppress the ancient god of light. Even after entering the tower and seeing the gods that had been confined, he didn't think of the suppression of the ancient god of light. However, everything that he was looking at now gave him a better idea of the immortal king's strength. The ancient gods that were suppressed here, such as the ancient god of darkness, the ancient god of fire, the ancient god of chaos, and the ancient god of war, all had power that was not inferior to the power of the ancient god of light. However, they still couldn't avoid the fate of becoming monosources and experimental objects, as they couldn't escape from the imprisonment. Finally, under the lead of the little skeleton, Lin Li arrived at the top floor of the mage tower. However, it was again very different from the previous one. Not only was the space obviously much smaller, it wasn't decorated much. The little skeleton walked to 2 hidden doors and stopped before respectfully saying to Lin Li, "Master, the things the previous master left you are in this room." The opening in the doors was enough to fit half a person, and there was some faint light that was being emitted from it. Lin Li looked in through the doorway and saw that it seemed to be a study inside, with rows of neatly arranged bookshelves that were full of books. There was a figure seated in front of a bookshelf with his back facing the door. He would only move his arm occasionally and seemed to be flipping through something. Lin Li was no stranger to that figure, which was the god of mages, Garesco, who had taught him countless times in the inverted tower. Of course, the Garesco here was probably not Garesco in his real form, but a phantom similar to the one in the inverted tower. Lin Li was initially still rather worried when he arrived. After all, he knew nothing about this place and couldn't trust the little skeleton completely either. However, After seeing Garesco's phantom, Lin Li naturally didn't have to worry about any traps here. Although he was a high-level sanctuary powerhouse, it would be a piece of cake for Garesco to destroy him. Lin Li reached out and gently pushed the door open a little before stepping in. However, as soon as Lin Li took a step inside, he immediately felt his vision turning blurry, and by the time it became clear again, he was already in another world. He was now standing on an island in the sea, and the only thing in sight was the vast, boundless ocean and roaring waves. Immediately afterwards, numerous meteors came falling from the sky with dazzling sparks. They cut through the sky with a whistling sound, and stirred up huge waves in the sea as each one fell. The deafening roar they emitted seemed like infinite thunderbolts. Lin Li stood on the island and watched the apocalyptic scene of the massive meteors falling endlessly. If it was just a calamity of falling meteors, it wouldn't be much for a sanctuary powerhouse. But Lin Li was extremely astonished. Lin Li could feel a strong divine aura from the falling meteors, which were actually deities, and not meteors. The gods had fallen. Was there anything more shocking than this? While being shell-shocked, Lin Li suddenly remembered the imprisoned gods that he had seen along the way, and couldn't help but wonder if there was some connection between the two. At this moment, a voice which seemed very familiar to him suddenly sounded in Lin Li's ears. "I believe you will be able to do what I managed to." It was Garesco. Lin Li naturally recognized Garesco's voice, but he wondered what Garesco was talking about. Is this the reason for the fall of the gods? Or did Garesco, who had come here after following the Immortal King's trail, already pass the Immortal King's test, and is telling me about his experience? Although the Immortal King and Garesco both claimed to be the most powerful existences in the history of Anral, Lin Li could not have possibly confused the two of them. The Immortal King and Garesco belonged to two completely different eras, and during Garesco's era, there had never been an event where the gods had fallen. In that case, the reason for the fall of the gods should have been the fierce and menacing Immortal King. Garesco might just be the second master of this place which he had inherited after passing the test of the Immortal King. However, Lin Li also did not have time to consider these issues, because the scene in front of him had changed again. The meteors that were falling from the sky had already vanished, but there was one that was darting towards him. This is probably the test. Lin Li's figure flashed, and he suddenly appeared in the air outside the island. The meteor that came crashing down smashed hard into that not too large island. All of a sudden, there was a deafening roar, and the entire island collapsed before quickly sinking to the bottom of the sea, forming a massive whirlpool. Immediately afterwards, a tall figure darted out from the center of the whirlpool like a cannonball and charged towards Lin Li. The enemy who charged towards Lin Li was 4 or 5 meters tall, and his body seemed to be somewhat transparent as it was made of water. As he moved, numerous ripples formed on his body. Lin Li could sense an extremely pure power of water elements from the mana fluctuations that he was emitting. In fact, it was not inferior to the debris of the stars, polar snow at all. Before the enemy could come close, Lin Li had already felt a dense and rich aura that swarmed towards him, as if he wasn't facing just an enemy, but the boundless endless ocean. That feeling immediately reminded Lin Li of the ancient god of water that controlled the elemental law of water, whom Lin Li had passed by before arriving here. Lin Li waved Helios scepter, and more than 10 giant pythons that were condensed from wind elements began charging towards the enemy. With his current sanctuary level power, even the ethereal wind elements could condense to form things that were as sturdy as steel. If the 10-odd wind elemental pythons intertwined themselves around an ancient wyrm, even it wouldn't be able to struggle and break free easily. The 10-odd wind elemental pythons almost blocked the space around the ancient god of water, thus leaving it with no means to retreat. However, the ancient god of water simply ignored it, and didn't show any intentions to dodge. Instead, it charged straight towards Lin Li. Just as the wind elemental pythons were about to come in contact with the ancient god of water, the ancient god of water seemed to humph in disdain. Immediately afterwards, a vast ocean appeared out of thin air, and the wind elemental pythons were instantly engulfed and devoured by layers of huge waves. Faced with this scene, Lin Li kept a straight face and continued to point the Helios scepter forward, after which a 100-meter-long light and darkness sword appeared and slashed at the ancient god of water. However, that wasn't all, because almost at the same time that the light and darkness sword was slashed outwards, Lin Li's domain world appeared around him too. The world power that was composed of various basic laws blasted out continuously from the domain world in various forms. It was as if a storm had swept towards the ancient god of water. The ancient gods were superior existences that were high above gods. Not to mention the strength of a sanctuary powerhouse like Lin Li. Even the main gods would have to succumb and bow down to the ancient gods with their power. Although Lin Li was not facing a genuine ancient god now, its strength was definitely not to be underestimated, since Garesco had produced it. In fact, Lin Li even guessed that the ancient god of water in front of him was part of the sealed ancient god of water. Not only did it have the power of the ancient gods, it also had the will of the ancient god. Although it did not have the complete power of the ancient god, the divine power it contained was not something that Lin Li could contend with. The power of the light and darkness sword was already at the peak of the sanctuary level, and among the attack spells that Lin Li had mastered, the world sword, which was a condensation of the world laws, was the only one that could compare to it. However, the world sword could not be maneuvered easily. At least, when facing such a powerful enemy like the ancient god, Lin Li did not dare to use the world sword recklessly. The light and darkness sword had an extraordinary power against ordinary sanctuary powerhouses, but its power was far inferior compared to the ancient gods. Under Lin Li's maneuver, the light and darkness sword slashed at the ancient god of water's head, while the other party looked more and more disdainful. With a mere thought, the massive waves in the surrounding air immediately charged towards the light and darkness sword. Without the roaring of the violent collision, the light and darkness sword that slashed against the waves paused a little before disintegrating like a sand sculpture struck by waves. It was stripped away layer by layer, and it vanished without a trace in the blink of an eye. The huge wave that crashed against the light and darkness sword did not weaken in the slightest, and continued to charge at Lin Li with a loud roar. The moment the huge wave washed the light and darkness sword away, Lin Li managed to feel the nomological power that condensed the light and darkness sword, as well as the massive power that would break down everything. Although water wasn't solid, it had a powerful abrasive power, and even the water of a small stream would have the ability to smoothen the rough edges of a hard and sturdy rock over time, let alone the power of the unparalleled massive waves. Immediately afterward, the massive wave once again crashed against Lin Li's domain world as it swept through everything in its path. The power that seemed to be able to drown the entire world placed Lin Li's world domain on the verge of collapse upon first contact. Faced with such immense pressure, Lin Li had no choice but to release all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars at once, and their light immediately shone brightly throughout the entire domain world before injecting a powerful force into the latter, which was already somewhat faltering. Given Lin Li's current power coupled with the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, it could be said that no one in the sanctuary realm would be able to compare to his domain world. Even High Priest Power, who was already a demigod, couldn't defeat Lin Li after lasting in his domain world for such a long time. However, the ancient gods were ultimately true gods that were superior to all other gods. Their power was far from what demigod-level sanctuary powerhouses could compare to. Besides, the most powerful divine kingdom of an ancient god was in existence that was far beyond the level of the domain worlds of mages at the sanctuary realm, who were about to become gods. The ancient god of water was obviously bent on killing Lin Li, whom it saw as an insignificant small fry. Without even testing the waters or anything, the vast ocean around it changed drastically, and the appearance of the ancient god of water's divine kingdom began to be revealed. Millions of believers emerged from the sea of the divine kingdom and worshipped the ancient god of water, while their prayers seemed to condense into a massive wave as a majestic divine might immediately filled the entire space. Lin Li and his domain world were completely surrounded by the ancient god of water's divine kingdom, while the sound of prayers and the majestic divine might placed great pressure on Lin Li's domain world. The creatures that were born in his domain world seemed to have sensed the calling of the ancient god of water, as they began to appear conflicted. Under such oppression, Lin Li was almost powerless and unable to retaliate. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that had been integrated into his domain world were constantly flashing in space, as if they were on the verge of charging out of the domain world. Although there wasn't a doomsday-like catastrophe in Lin Li's domain world, he could sense that his domain world was getting out of his control. Faced with such great pressure, Lin Li raised the Helios scepter, and the endless, massive mana in his body darted out almost immediately. In his domain world, the debris of the stars, holy light and gloomy dark, suddenly broke free from the space, and even turned into 2 massive snakes, one black and one white. They began roaming rapidly in the domain world. That was a method to temporarily strengthen one's domain world, which Lin Li had obtained through his research on the twin serpents of light and darkness. This method required the usage of the debris of the stars, holy light and gloomy dark, to replace the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness to make the domain world almost as solid as a divine kingdom. With the appearance of the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness, the divine power of the ancient god of water that had penetrated Lin Li's domain world was finally restrained to a certain extent. The laws that constituted the domain world also finally resumed operation to a certain extent, allowing the domain world that was initially almost drowned out by the ocean to re-emerge from the surface of the water. However, Lin Li knew very well that even with the use of such a method, his domain world, which was now like a pseudo-divine kingdom, would not be able to hold up for long against the ancient god of water's divine kingdom, let alone defeat it. Sensing the changes in Lin Li's domain world, the ancient god of water seemed slightly surprised. After all, domain worlds that had similar characteristics to that of divine kingdoms were rather rare in this world. Even a powerhouse that had newly advanced to godhood might not be able to create their own divine kingdom immediately. Only gods that had reached the level of main gods would be able to use the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness to stabilize their divine kingdoms. Apart from having obtained some of the mysteries of the twin serpents of light and darkness from their incarnations, a more important reason that Lin Li managed to achieve such a feat was because he had the two pieces of the debris of the stars, holy light and gloomy dark. The debris of the stars contained the purest nomological power, and was the best magical item set to be used for manifesting the twin serpents of light and darkness. Even a true god might not be able to possess such a thing. With holy light and gloomy dark, Lin Li finally managed to have the chance to manifest the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness in his domain world, even though his strength was only at the sanctuary realm. However, Lin Li's realm was ultimately still too low. Moreover, he hadn't mastered much of the arcane mysteries of the twin serpents of light and darkness. Even with holy light and gloomy dark as the foundation, the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness that had been formed were far from perfect, and could only be considered an inferior product. After adding the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness to his domain world to enhance its resistance and defense, Lin Li immediately focused his energy on drawing the Mageths. With his current strength, it was simply impossible for him to fight the ancient god of water's phantom toe-to-toe, even if it only had a tenth of the ancient god of water's strength. Hence, he thought of the Mount Tai Mageth, which was the result of his recent research. The Mount Tai Mageth was a condensation of Lin Li's comprehension of the divine smith level Mageth, and the main reason it could suppress the demigod level wild whale Rabu was not actually its great power. Most importantly, it was because the laws used in the Mount Tai Mageth were completely independent of the laws of Anral, as they were actually new laws that Lin Li had created. The reason for a powerhouse's great strength was his mastery of nomological power. Meanwhile, demigod-level powerhouses had fused the laws completely with their bodies and souls. Hence, in order to suppress the other party under the original laws, one would have to apply power that was dozens, or even hundreds of times stronger than the other parties. Lin Li's Mount Tai Mageth was completely different from any law in this world, being something that even wild whale Rabu had never come into contact with before. In the face of the laws of the Mount Tai Mageth, Rabu was just like an elementary-level mage apprentice. Hence, as long as the Mount Tai Mageth could exert power that was equivalent to Rabus, it would be able to suppress Rabu at the bottom of the ocean. Ancient gods had the inherent control of a certain type of powerful law. In fact, they could even be considered a type of law themselves, which was the advantage that they had over the other gods. At the same time, it was also a major disadvantage because they would forever be constrained by the limits of this law. Of course, for the other gods apart from the ancient gods, the creation of new laws was not a simple task at all. After all, those gods were born in this world, and even if they had reached the level of being able to create laws of their own, the laws that they created would still be based on the basic laws of this world, which was the limitation of their thoughts. Lin Li was the only one who could create new laws that were independent of this world because he had the knowledge of another world. The law of the Mount Tai Mageth was not that of a mountain, but was based on a popular saying, which meant a world of a difference. Otherwise, he could have just used a certain type of law to mobilize the power of other mountains in Anral that were much more majestic than Mount Tai instead of creating new laws. However, after understanding how hard it was to create new laws, Lin Li couldn't help but have doubts about the origin of the Immortal King again. Strictly speaking, the Immortal King's divine smith-level Mageth actually involved a creation of laws, in the true sense, while Lin Li's Mount Tai Mageth was somewhat of a trick. However, regardless of how wild and vivid one's imagination might be, it could never break free from the limitations of reality. For example, the phrase, "when pigs fly," might seem absurd, but it was still imaginable because pigs did exist in reality, and the scenario of pigs flying was still within the basis of reality. Another example would be that a farmer could never imagine what an emperor had for his meals every day, because he had no knowledge of what an emperor ate at all. Perhaps the best food he could imagine was meat. Hence, it was extremely difficult to break through the impact of reality on the human mind. Even the gods that had reached the level of being able to create laws might not be able to create laws that were really free from all the limitations of reality. The laws created by the subordinate gods and main gods were all created based on the basic laws of Anral, so they had never been able to surpass the ancient gods, who were the origin of laws. Lin Li managed to create the laws of the Mount Magath because he came from another world that was different from Anral. Then, the immortal king was able to create new laws because he truly had a mind that was free from restraints, and also because he was. That reminded Lin Li of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and the things that originally belonged to the game, Endless World, as well as the shadow of the King Hunter in the Well of the Sun. He had a hunch that was becoming increasingly stronger. The reason he came to Anral might really be related to the immortal king in some way. However, Lin Li still couldn't imagine what exactly the relationship between the two was. Fortunately, it was just considered a goal of his, and he thought that perhaps he would one day be able to get the answer he wanted from the immortal king. Now, what he needed to do was to defeat the powerful ancient god of water. The ancient god of water's power might be incomplete, but his willpower and his mastery of the laws would not be weakened by the suppression of power. The powerful water divine kingdom had flooded the entire space. There was an extremely luxurious crystal palace in the boundless ocean, where millions of the ancient god's followers were praying piously. Lin Li needed time to complete the drawing of the Mount Magath, but the ancient god of water obviously wouldn't give Lin Li any time to do so. As the ancient divine texts flowed out, the entire divine kingdom got into a huge uproar. The millions of believers leapt up and gathered in midair to form a huge wave that covered the sky and subsequently smashed against Lin Li's domain world. The massive power of it was enough to crush the entire mainland into bits. When the massive wave struck, Lin Li's domain world was overturned. The earth crumbled and the sky collapsed, forming an apocalyptic scene that seemed like doomsday. The debris of the stars that had been integrated into the domain world was shaken by the massive force to the extent that it was about to break free. The phantoms of the 2 black and white pythons were rolling in the sky of the domain world incessantly, futilely trying to repair the space that was about to crumble. However, it was just the attack of one large wave. The subsequent huge waves left Lin Li with no chance to stop for a moment and catch his breath at all. As the space of the domain world crumbled, the power of the ancient god of water surged in from every possible crevice, forming a huge flood that seemed to be drowning the world inside Lin Li's domain world. Such a terrifying power would probably be enough to destroy even the sun. What more a small domain world like Lin Li's? The suppression of the incarnations of the twin serpents of light and darkness that were manifested with gloomy dark and holy light allowed the domain world to barely maintain some cohesion. Otherwise, the laws that constituted the domain world would have probably disintegrated a long time ago. It was known to many that water and fire were merciless. At this moment, Lin Li finally had a true understanding of the power of water. Although the elemental law of water was one of the 4 basic elemental laws, mages, just like everyone else, generally felt that the water element attack spells were not powerful enough, and were in fact inferior to ice element offensive spells, which were derived from water elements. For example, the attack power of the most ordinary attack spell Water Arrow was still inferior to that of the offensive spell Ice Arrow. Hence, many mages would prefer to use ice elemental laws because of the strong attack power and defensive ability. However, the ancient god of water had now shown Lin Li the true power of the water elemental laws, which was drastically different from the knowledge of water elemental laws that the vast majority of mages had. The destructive and terrifying power it possessed was far from what the ice elemental laws could compare to. Destroying the world and drowning everything was what the true power of the water elemental laws could do. Compared to the powerful water elements, the power of the ice elemental laws was simply insignificant. Of course, for Lin Li, the more powerful the ancient god of water was, the more dangerous a situation he would be in. Hence, he didn't have time to marvel about the ancient god of water's use of water elements. Instead, he focused entirely on drawing the Mount Magath. In order to get enough time for himself, he shrunk his domain world to the smallest possible size and shrouded almost only the area within 10-odd meters around himself. He sacrificed space for the strength of the domain world. After shrinking his domain world to a certain extent, the twin serpents of light and darkness that were formed with gloomy dark and holy light almost revolved around him. They continuously emitted black and white rays of light that came with an extremely arcane aura that was integrated into the domain world to strengthen it. Initially, Lin Li's domain world covered an extremely large area and was a completely realistic microcosm. However, that also meant that it was subject to more attacks from the Water Divine Kingdom. Now that Lin Li shrank his domain world to the smallest possible size, the power of its defenses was concentrated, and the contact area that was susceptible to attacks naturally became smaller too. Unfortunately, the current size of the domain world was already Lin Li's limit. Otherwise, if he could shrink it to the size of a speck of dust, there was probably nothing that could be done to him. Only a true divine kingdom could be expanded to a size that was larger than Anral and shrunk to the size of a speck of dust that was invisible to the naked eye. After all, Lin Li had yet to achieve godhood, and wasn't completely free from the shackles of Anril either. Hence, he couldn't free himself from Anril and integrate his body into his domain world. Everything was still limited to the laws of Anril. However, Lin Li didn't think that his chances of victory were high just because of this. After all, he was facing an ancient god that was far above all other gods. How could it possibly not have any means of retaliation? He just hoped that he could buy a little time to complete the Mount Tai Magath. Indeed, as Lin Li shrunk his domain world, most of the water ancient god's attacks immediately struck empty air. However, upon seeing this, the ancient god of water immediately switched tactics and simply tried to crush Lin Li with the water divine kingdom, completely assimilating Lin Li and his shrunk domain world into the divine kingdom. Before Lin Li could continue drawing the Mount Tai Magath, he felt his vision turn dark. Immediately afterwards, he saw that there was water everywhere around him. Water began gushing towards him from all sides, placing him under massive pressure, so much so that the lights of his domain world began flickering incessantly, seemingly on the verge of collapsing. Under such circumstances, others would probably no longer be in the mood to draw a Magath anymore, or might even be crushed to death by the terrifying pressure while drawing the Magath. Lin Li was just as worried, but he knew that the only hope he had of defeating the ancient god of water was dependent on the Mount Tai Magath. Hence, even when faced with such a dangerous situation, he couldn't give up on drawing the Magath. However, while drawing the Magath, Lin Li of course wouldn't just suffer the attacks of the ancient god of water without doing anything. While continuing to mobilize his mana to draw the Mount Tai Magath in the air, he released the debris of the stars, polar snow, from his domain world. He then catalyzed the nomological power of water to retaliate against the world laws. The water elemental laws contained in polar snow were not inferior to the laws mastered by the ancient god of water. However, Lin Li did not have the stars of fury, and could not fully exert the power in polar snow, though it was not impossible to fight against the ancient god of water by buying some time through the power of polar snow to draw the Magath. Under Lin Li's manipulation, nomological power emanating from polar snow was not going hard against the ancient god of water, but rather it was integrating the power of the same source into the surrounding water divine kingdom. Of course, Lin Li was not trying to gain control of the water divine kingdom. He still had a reasonable self-awareness. However, doing so would give Lin Li some relief from the pressure from the water divine kingdom by redirecting the power that was crushing him away from his domain world under the guidance of the power of polar snow. Although Lin Li wouldn't be immune to the massive pressure, it could be alleviated to a certain extent. Polar snow might have been drawn away from the domain world, which was almost about to be crushed, but the latter's condition was clearly much better than before. Lin Li took the opportunity to quickly draw the Mount Tai Magath, his arms moving so quickly that they almost formed a phantom. The patterns that were condensed from mana, as well as the arcane magic runes, were continuously taking shape in front of him, evolving towards becoming a perfect Magath. However, the ancient god of water soon discovered Lin Li's trick. As an ancient god, who innately controlled the laws of water, how could he have possibly failed to notice the changes in his divine kingdom? Lin Li's actions were like a blatant provocation to the ancient god of water, because someone actually dared to use the nomological power of water right in front of him. The water around Lin Li immediately receded in all directions and retreated to a great distance, making it seem as if Lin Li was in a bubble at the bottom of the sea. However, the ancient god of water was not letting him off. Immediately afterwards, the water around him suddenly surged and charged towards Lin Li with a loud roar. The water around Lin Li was initially already putting great pressure on his domain world. Coupled with the surge now, its power would probably be increased by hundreds or thousands of times. It was as if the seawater of the endless ocean smashed into a single person immediately. Even the real gods would probably falter, let alone Lin Li, a sanctuary powerhouse. Faced with such an attack, Lin Li naturally did not dare to be careless at all. He had no choice but to temporarily stop drawing the Magaths, and instead raised the Helios scepter while quickly chanting a magic incantation. As soon as he was done, the boundless water around him had already charged towards him, while roaring loudly, seemingly trying to crush him. However, of course, when the water struck Lin Li's domain world, it simply passed through almost without any hindrance, as if the domain world was no longer existent. Water then surged in from all directions with a terrifying power, converging at the spot where Lin Li was, just like a bunch of bulls colliding. However, the power was more than 1,000,000 times stronger, and it immediately formed a huge vortex. However, Lin Li, who was at the center of the impact, was not affected in the slightest. Not only was his body undamaged, he didn't even move a single inch. He was still drawing the Magath with great speed, the various magic patterns flickering with the light of mana. Of course Lin Li wouldn't be affected. Just as the attack was about to reach him, he had already completed the Void of the Stars technique that Garesco had once performed. In this moment, his body was already anchored in the void, and completely unaffected by the power of this world. Under the terrifying pressure of the water, Lin Li initially didn't dare to cast the Void of the Stars technique at all. After all, it couldn't be launched immediately. Being subjected to the enormous water pressure around him, he would be crushed by the millions of tons of hydrostatic pressure even if there was a hole that opened for only a 1,000th of a second after he cast the Void of the Stars. In a bid to kill Lin Li in one fell swoop, the ancient god of water tried to accumulate more power to launch a terrifying attack, but ended up giving Lin Li the opportunity to cast the Void of the Stars. There was a flaw to the Void of the Stars. It allowed Lin Li and the ancient god of water to exist in what seemed like two separate spaces, and thus the ancient god of water couldn't attack Lin Li, but Lin Li couldn't attack it either. However, what Lin Li had to do now was not to counterattack against the ancient god of water, but to take the opportunity to complete his Mount Taimagath. He knew very well that even if he gathered the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, he still wouldn't be able to hurt the ancient god of water at all, and the Mount Taimagath was the only possible way he could win. However, the ancient god of water was not completely powerless against Lin Li's Void of the Stars technique. More than 100 majestic palaces emerged from the water divine kingdom, with a statue of the ancient god of water in front of each of them. Next, the statues suddenly began to flash, and a massive magic array appeared in the center above the hundreds of statues, placing Lin Li in the middle. With the appearance of the magic array, Lin Li immediately felt that an inexplicable force had landed on his body in the void. That gave Lin Li a huge fright. The Void of the Stars technique required one to attach their physical body to a certain layer, and if one wanted to attack the caster of the Void of the Stars, they would have to identify the layer of void that his body was in. That was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, Lin Li did not expect that the ancient god of water had not only mastered the elemental laws of water to the extreme, but also had a profound understanding of the laws of space. Hence, he managed to quickly locate the void where Lin Li's physical body was. However, when Lin Li thought about the ancient god of water's identity, he felt that it did make sense. After all, it was an ancient god that was far above the other gods. How could ancient gods possibly rely on their inherent mastery of the nomological power? Even the ordinary gods did not purely master only the laws that allowed them to become gods, but rather they also had knowledge of some other laws. No one could become a god just by mastering a single type of law. Even if one specialized in a certain law, they would still have to understand other laws in order to deepen their comprehension of this one law they specialized in. Hence, even the god of fire, god of earth, god of botany, and so on had a far greater comprehension of the laws than mortals of the sanctuary realm. Faced with Lin Li's Void of the Stars technique, the ancient god of water instantly found the void in which Lin Li was hiding. Next, water surged into it with massive power, almost ripping apart that layer of void. With a single flash of the light on Lin Li's body, Lin Li was forced out of the void and propelled back into the space where the ancient god of water's divine kingdom was. However, Lin Li didn't panic much this time. Looking at the mighty and majestic ancient god of water in the divine kingdom, he reached out to add the last magic rune to the Magath in front of him. In an instant, the Mount Taimagath erupted with a dazzling light, and transformed from a Magath that was the height of a human into a golden net that covered the sky and the earth in the blink of an eye. 36,000 Magaths began spinning slowly in the sky like a millstone. The hundreds of thousands of magic runes flashed continuously like stars in the sky. A strange, massive power that didn't belong to this world engulfed the water divine kingdom. Under the oppression of the Mount Taimagath, the water divine kingdom, which was already filling up the entire space, was instantly suppressed without any power to retaliate. It then began falling like a tide. The sky and sun were revealed, but the power didn't seem to subside. Instead, it began landing at an increasingly quick speed. The ancient god of water, who was standing in the divine kingdom, raised his hands and roared while being overwhelmed by the nomological power of water, seemingly trying to block the oppressive force. Although the otherworldly force wasn't stronger than the ancient god of water, he couldn't resist it. The water divine kingdom began shrinking bit by bit, gradually turning into a domineering and majestic ancient city that surfaced around the ancient god of water. It had walls that were over 30 meters high, and was larger than the capital of the Gilded Kingdom, though much smaller, compared to the boundless divine kingdom. However, even so, the ancient city began to seem a little warped and faint under the suppression of that Mount Taimagath, as if it would disappear at any moment. At this moment, the ancient god of water suddenly roared, and stomped his left foot, after which the divine kingdom shrunk and almost compressed the ancient city to the point of crumbling. However, the remains gathered into a huge force that struck the Mount Taimagath in the sky. In an instant, numerous roars filled the air, and several pure yet massive clusters of nomological power charged into the sky before exploding under the obstruction of an invisible power. If the terrifying power were to fall on Four Seasons Island, a few blows would probably be enough to blast it into ashes. However, it wasn't effective here at all. With both hands in the air, the ancient god of water still couldn't stop itself from falling. The tendons on its body were bulging, and even the massive power that was constantly surging towards its hands could be seen. However, in the air where its hands were, the power of the Mount Magoth was not affected at all, and it seemed to be constantly pressing downward. Lin Li stood in the void and watched coldly as the ancient god of water was suppressed by the power of the Mount Magoth. At the same time, he was sensing the powerful mana fluctuations, which were gradually becoming inconspicuous. Eventually, countless rays of golden light were cast on the massive body of the ancient god of water, suppressing the latter's power bit by bit until it turned into a mass of light, just like the gods being suppressed outside. Lin Li had created the Mount Magoth with his mana and mental strength, which was very different from drawing on a scroll with inscription ink. Hence, Lin Li's mental strength immediately charged into the light mass that the ancient god of water transformed into through the mental strength connection with the Mount Magoth. The ancient god of water's willpower in the mass of light had already been completely suppressed, and what was left was the origin of water that the ancient god of water had mastered. The origin of water could be considered the purest elemental laws of water and the power source of the ancient god of water. More importantly, it contained the divinity of the ancient god. Although Lin Li had the debris of the stars, polar snow, and the elemental laws of water that it contained were not inferior to those of the ancient god of water, it was impossible to penetrate it using his mental strength. Besides, Lin Li could also sense that the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars actually also had their own willpower. However, their willpower was different from that of ordinary people. It was a willpower that was high above all beings in the world. However, the willpower of the debris of the stars seemed to be in a dormant state. Hence, Lin Li did not dare to casually probe it using his mental strength. However, the origin of water was different. The willpower of the ancient gods had already been suppressed, and the remaining origin of water was just like a masterless power. Lin Li was at ease, and it could even be said that he could use his mental strength to search and probe everything without any scruples. After some time, perhaps a moment or a much longer period of time, Lin Li finally withdrew his mental strength from the origin of water. At the same time, he let out a long sigh of relief. To him, the origin of water boasted great benefits, and it allowed his mastery of the elemental laws of water to improve by leaps and bounds. The various issues that he'd previously encountered in mastering the elemental laws of water seemed to have been resolved perfectly at this moment. Besides, the origin of water also contained the divinity of an ancient god, which was a great guidance for Lin Li in achieving godhood. Although he wouldn't take the path that the ancient god of water did, being able to understand some information about the ancient gods and other deities in advance through the divinity, and it would also be an important inspiration for him. Of course, Lin Li didn't let go of the origin of water, and instead he stowed it away into his ring of endless storm. Although it contained the divinity as well as the will of the ancient god of water that was suppressed, and Lin Li could not think of a way to use it yet, he couldn't let that be a reason to dispose of it. As the will of the ancient god of water completely disappeared from this space, its original appearance was restored, and once again there were violent movements. The original island where Lin Li stood suddenly began to grow in all directions, rapidly eating away at the space that initially belonged to the sea. However, a few breaths later, the sea that was originally boundless actually turned into a barren land right in front of Lin Li, without a single trace of seawater left. Immediately afterwards, a giant that seemed to be made of rock slowly stood up in the middle where the island was originally located. With a loud roar, the entire land changed once again. Mountain ranges and several giant mountain peaks began to rise as if they had come to life. The longest mountain range was almost invisible at a glance, and the tallest peak seemed like a sharp sword that was piercing into the sky. The ancient god of earth, seeing the changes in the environment, coupled with the divine aura that was emanating from the other party's body, Lin Li immediately knew that it was the ancient god of earth who inherently mastered the laws of earth. Almost at the same time that the ancient god of earth appeared, Lin Li felt a powerful force that shrouded him. Although it was unclear if it was a pulling force or pressure, Lin Li was dragged downwards towards the ground forcefully. That was actually the gravity spell, which everyone mistook the Mount magic scroll for during the auction. However, the gravity spell, which the people belittled, actually seemed different when cast by the ancient god of earth. In addition to falling, Lin Li's body was also constrained by the power, and it was almost impossible for him to move his body. At this rate, he would definitely fall to the ground like a meteor and turn into a pile of badly mangled flesh. He would become a sanctuary powerhouse who had fallen to his death. It was said that when the ancient god of earth used the simple gravity spell during the age of mythology, it could even pull celestial bodies down from the void and create a calamity like an artificial meteor shower. Hundreds of tons of celestial bodies came raining down from the void, and the power of each was not inferior to the full-force attack of a sanctuary powerhouse. A sanctuary powerhouse would instantly be turned into ashes after getting struck by it, and even their soul would be burned to ashes by the flames. Just like the ancient god of water, the ancient god of earth, in front of Lin Li now had only a small portion of his power left, coupled with his willpower. Hence, his strength was far from the point of overriding the gods, and was in fact just a little more divine than that of demigod-level powerhouses. Of course, having more divinity was already quite an impressive feat, because that meant that the ancient god was still a true deity despite having been weakened, and not a demigod that had just reached this realm. Upon sensing the huge attraction, Lin Li's domain world changed immediately as well. The debris of the stars that had been integrated into the domain world became dominated by the new life containing the laws of earth. Dealing with the power of the ancient god of earth, using the power of the debris of the stars, rebirth was akin to using polar snow against the ancient god of water previously. Under the power of the debris of the stars, rebirth, Lin Li's falling speed slowed down and gradually stabilized, while he regained his mobility. At the same time, he also raised the Helios scepter in his hand, and the sky was suddenly filled with gloomy clouds. Numerous lightning balls began landing on the ancient god of earth with deafening roars. However, before the countless balls of lightning could reach the head of the ancient god of earth, a large rock palm suddenly extended from the earth below, and with its gentle wave, all the attacks in the air vanished. Immediately afterwards, the ancient god of earth stomped his foot, and a mountain peak stabbed out of the earth like a sharp sword before darting towards Lin Li. The peaks seemed like the earth-spiked magic spells that had been enlarged countless times. Like the fangs of a giant beast, the peaks chased after Lin Li's figure and tried to impale him incessantly. On the other hand, Lin Li seemed to have become a sparrow shuttling through a thick forest, casting magic spells and dodging the terrifying earth spike-like peaks. The battle with the ancient god of water proved that the Mount Mageth was still very effective in suppressing ancient gods. However, when facing the ancient god of earth, Lin Li did not use the Mount Mageth immediately, and instead did his best to go in circles with his opponent. In fact, he even placed himself in an extremely dangerous situation. It wasn't that Lin Li was trying to put himself through suffering, but rather he didn't want to give up such an opportunity to familiarize himself with the power of the ancient gods so easily. Instead of a test left by Garesco, it was more like a chance to learn to fight with gods. There was no other place in this world that would give one a chance to fight against gods. What other person could suppress the power of the ancient gods to such an extent, and send a sanctuary powerhouse there for training? The ancient god was very powerful. Even though the majority of his power had been suppressed, Lin Li still wouldn't be able to defeat him easily. However, if Lin Li had used the Mount Mageth all the way, it would probably have been difficult to reap many benefits from it. The Mount Mageth definitely wasn't omnipotent, and if he met a true god again in the future, the effects that the Mount Mageth could exert would probably be limited too. By then, it would be too late for regrets. Lin Li could still get a massive power of origin after suppressing the ancient gods and a clearer understanding of the origin laws from it. However, it would be akin to getting a book. While one could flip through the pages and gain some knowledge from their content, it didn't mean that one would be able to internalize the information and know how to apply it. Only through the battles with the ancient gods could Lin Li clearly see the way that the ancient gods used the power of origin, which was also important for his integration of the knowledge he had gained. Seeing that the peaks that were piercing through the sky still couldn't catch Lin Li, the ancient god of earth lost his patience at this point and swung his fist into the sky abruptly. Although that punch seemed ordinary, the appearance of the sky suddenly changed with it. The sky, which was originally turquoise blue, turned into the same color as Earth, and it was as if the entire Earth was hanging upside down in the sky. Lin Li was flying in the air, and if he looked above him, he would even feel as if he was hanging upside down. Besides, like the earth beneath his feet, mountains and peaks were also emerging from the earth above his head. The sword-like mountain peaks also began charging towards Lin Li. This time, Lin Li was facing a bombardment of attacks coming from all directions, and it wasn't that easy for him to rely on his flexibility and agility to dodge them. Besides, the intertwined peaks formed a cage that made Lin Li's range of activity shrink more and more. Such an attack was not really that terrifying for Lin Li. Without the influence of the terrifying gravity, even an ordinary sanctuary powerhouse might not be in much danger, let alone Lin Li. Hence, it made Lin Li feel that the ancient god of earth seemed to be playing the cat and mouse game with him, and completely treating him like a plaything. "Ant, hand over that thing in your hand," and I'll grant you the honor of becoming my believer." A mellow voice suddenly sounded in Lin Li's mind. It naturally belonged to the ancient god of earth, because there was no one else around apart from Lin Li himself, and the ancient god of earth. That also made Lin Li understand that the ancient god of earth had been coveting what he was holding. Although the ancient god of earth did not state explicitly what it was, Lin Li could already guess that the ancient god of earth was probably after his debris of the stars, rebirth, which contained the pure laws of earth. At this moment, the ancient god of earth possessed only a small portion of his power that was drawn from his main body. Hence, he was barely maintaining his power as a god, and naturally couldn't break free from the restraint. If the ancient god of earth could obtain the debris of the stars, rebirth, he would at least be able to restore a large portion of his strength, if not the full amount that he had during his prime. With the temporary lifting of the suppression by the divine smith-level Mageth, and the recovery of a large part of his strength with the aid of the debris of the stars, rebirth, the ancient god of earth might have a chance to break free. No one was willing to be imprisoned forever. What more an ancient god, who was once above all other gods and deities? If you want it, come and get it yourself by defeating me. How could Lin Li possibly give something as important as the debris of the stars to the ancient god of earth? His battles with the ancient gods were supposed to be a test left by Garesco, and even if the ancient god was unwilling to fight Lin Li, the latter would have to force the former to fight instead of trying to find a way to avoid the battle. The only thing Lin Li would get out of handing his debris of the stars over to the ancient god of earth was becoming a slave to the latter. Lin Li wouldn't hold himself cheap like that. The ancient god of earth had to have been suppressed for too long, so much so that his brains were fried. Lin Li's answer had undoubtedly angered the ancient god of earth. He was one of the powerful ancient gods, and the qualifying criteria to become their slaves were extremely demanding, and generally only true gods and deities would qualify. Besides, Lin Li was just an ant-like mortal to him, and yet he actually dared to say something so arrogant. The ancient god felt that it was simply the greatest insult to him. "In that case, die, ant," the ancient god of earth hollered furiously, and numerous mountain peaks appeared in the sky and earth. Just like the sharp fangs of gigantic beasts, they chomped down on Lin Li. Lin Li had already anticipated the ancient god of earth's reaction. The Helios scepter flickered, and various 100-meter-long light and darkness swords emerged from around Lin Li's body before slashing towards the mountain peaks like a windmill. The entire space was instantly filled with continuous roars as the light and darkness sword collided with the mountain peaks that resembled sharp swords. It was as if Lin Li and the ancient god of earth were in a sword fight. However, the ancient god of earth's methods were clearly not limited to that, as his attacks were followed by magic spells that contained the laws of earth. They were bombarding Lin Li like a storm. The earth elemental magic spells that the ancient god of earth cast were not merely flying sand and stones, but he had also displayed an excellent application of the laws of earth. The ancient god of earth could even use the laws of earth to cast magic spells in conjunction with other laws, such as thunderbolt flames and thunderstorm gale, each of which contained destructive power. Lin Li's domain world was rapidly changing in size. Hundreds of light and darkness swords danced in the air to form a shadow of light, constantly blocking attacks from all directions. However, Lin Li's strength was eventually far weaker than that of the ancient god of earth. In the beginning, he could use a light and darkness sword to offset an attack, but he gradually had to put in more and more power. When a huge mountain peak which resembled a sky castle fell straight towards Lin Li, dozens of light and darkness swords immediately flew out of the defensive range and slashed towards the mountain. If this were elsewhere, Lin Li would be able to slash it into pieces even if it was more than 10 times larger than this one. However, this mountain peak, that contained the laws of earth, or rather one that was purely made up of laws of earth, was not that easy to deal with. The numerous 100-meter-long light and darkness swords began blasting at the mountain peak that flew over along with the sound of air exploding. However, the collision between the light and darkness swords and the mountain peak did not cause a single explosion. Instead, it was as if the attacks had landed on a desert as they sunk and vanished upon contact. Immediately afterwards, the mental connection between Lin Li and the light and darkness swords was instantly cut off. However, Lin Li did not panic at all. Ordinary magic spells would vanish as soon as the link was cut off, but the light and darkness swords, which utilized two extreme forces consisting of light and darkness, were completely free from the restraint of Lin Li's mental strength. As a result, the two forces exploded because of the conflicting power. As expected, the moment the connection was severed, a low explosion sounded from that massive mountain peak. Numerous large bulges began to appear on the mountain peak, resembling large bubbles in boiling water. Unfortunately, that was the limit. Although the power of the light and darkness swords was terrifying, it wasn't enough to disintegrate the mountain peak. The massive mountain peak was still falling towards Lin Li like a meteor with a deafening roar. If it had been an ordinary mountain peak, Lin Li would not have suffered much damage even if he got hit by it, because of the great defensive power of the domain world. However, this mountain peak was composed entirely of the laws of Earth, and the mountain peak was only its physical form. Essentially, it was the bombardment of the laws of Earth, which Lin Li didn't dare to underestimate. Lin Li did not use the Void of the Stars technique again, because he knew it would not be of much use against ancient gods. As the light on the Helios scepter flickered, a looming spear of light suddenly appeared in Lin Li's domain world. It was none other than the debris of the stars, nothingness. Lin Li took out the crossbow of reincarnation, while the nothingness spear turned into an arrow that was placed on the crossbow. Immediately afterwards, it darted out with the buckling of the crossbow mechanism. Nothingness had the most bizarre power among all pieces of the debris of the stars. It contained the laws of time and space, and was the one Lin Li had mastered to the lowest extent. However, the power of nothingness was not to be doubted. When he killed the dragon of destruction, in the endless world, the power of nothingness played an extremely crucial role. After nothingness was launched, it slashed through the space with an unpredictable light and shot straight into the mountain peak. Next, a massive vortex seemed to have appeared in the middle of the huge mountain peak and began devouring the surrounding rock. In the blink of an eye, the mountain peak, which was even larger than a sky castle, vanished without a trace in midair. All that was left was the faint vortex, which seemed to be about to vanish. Clearly, the ancient god of Earth did not expect Lin Li to have so many good things and was momentarily stunned by the development. However, although the power was bizarre, it was still far from being enough to defeat him in his eyes. Hence, he didn't feel anything else other than surprise. The ancient god of the earth pointed his hand forward, and more than 10 mountain peaks once again rose up immediately around Lin Li, constantly rotating around him. One by one, they ruthlessly collided with Lin Li. At the same time, the earth above his head, which seemed to be a reflection of the earth below, tried to crush Lin Li like a large millstone. After a few moments of exchanging blows, Lin Li finally couldn't hold on any longer. With his strength as a high-level sanctuary powerhouse, there was still a great difference between him and the ancient god of Earth, even though the latter had been greatly restrained. The fact that Lin Li had not been killed in seconds by the ancient god of Earth was already something to be proud of. Of course, although he didn't spend much time fighting, Lin Li gained a good understanding of the ancient god of Earth's usage of the laws of Earth. Although his attainments couldn't be compared to those of the ancient god of Earth, it could be said that gaining this understanding was akin to opening a door for Lin Li. The inspiration it gave him could not be measured according to any standard. Sensing that he was already having a hard time holding up, Lin Li stopped wasting any more time, and instead reached out to start drawing the Mount Tai Magath. However, the Mount Tai Magath was significantly different from before this time because Lin Li had made changes to it according to the characteristics of the ancient god of Earth. In fact, it was thanks to this battle that Lin Li had gained a better understanding of the ancient god of Earth. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have been able to suppress the ancient god of Earth using the original Mount Tai Magath. Although many things were triggered, when Lin Li drew the Mount Tai Magath again, it didn't affect Lin Li's drawing speed. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were reintegrated into his domain world to enhance its defensive power. Afterwards, he began drawing the new Mount Tai Magath quickly while dealing with the storm-like attacks of the ancient god of Earth. Due to the fact that he had gained experience from that battle with the ancient god of water, Lin Li managed to free himself from danger this time, even though he was in quite a disheveled state. Finally, when the domain world was about to collapse, the Mount Tai Magath in front of Lin Li was also completed. As Lin Li drew the last stroke, the completed Mount Tai Magath flickered and flew out of the domain world. Its light almost made the entire space gilded. Under the suppression of the Mount Tai Magath, the earth above his head and under his feet melted rapidly like snow under the sun. The sky above his head was blue again, and a turquoise blue sea appeared beneath his feet. All the power of the laws of Earth was forced back into the ancient god of Earth's body. The ancient god of Earth, who was originally like a titan, also began to collapse under the pressure. Sensing the power of the suppression, the ancient god of Earth roared indignantly, and he kept blasting his arms towards the surroundings, as if he was trying to disperse the oppressive force. However, his attacks seemed to be futile as he couldn't touch the power of the Mount Tai Magath at all. Lin Li stood still in the air and watched as the Mount Tai Magath and magic runes began to flicker on the ancient god of Earth's body. The tall body of the ancient god of Earth gradually began shrinking before eventually turning into a mass of yellow light. Lin Li waved his hand and grasped the mass of yellow light before channeling his mental strength into the mass of light immediately. Just like bees sucking nectar, it absorbed the knowledge of the laws of Earth in the mass of light into his mind. After a long time, Lin Li finally opened his eyes and stowed away the mass of light that represented the power of origin of Earth into his ring of endless storm. Immediately afterwards, the debris of the stars, rebirth, flew out from his domain world, and released a light that was drastically different from before. Sensing that he was getting more and more comfortable with controlling rebirth, Lin Li had greater anticipation for the next test. At this moment, the loud sounds of a violent explosion suddenly came from the sky. Immediately afterwards, Lin Li saw a huge fireball smashing towards him. Is it the ancient god of fire's turn this time? However, regardless of what it was, Lin Li did not dare to really take on the attack. Instead, he activated his space robe and flew in another direction. When the fireball landed on the position where Lin Li was originally standing at, it seemed to stop as if the emergency brakes were applied. Next, the fireball stretched out and turned into a figure that was engulfed by flames, emitting a suffocating divine power like a god descending from the sky. It was an ancient god, but not the ancient god of fire that Lin Li thought he was. Although his body was covered in blazing flames, the flames did not contain a trace of the origin of fire. After stretching his body, that ancient god turned to face Lin Li, and his body shook a little. Soon, the flames that shrouded his body were instantly extinguished by a strange power. As the flames vanished, the ancient god's appearance was unraveled. He was nearly 10 meters tall, and the muscles of his naked body seemed to be cast in steel. There was no doubt that he possessed the power to overturn the sea and sky. The ancient god of strength. Lin Li finally recognized his opponent to be the ancient god of strength who had mastered the origin of strength, and who was said to be able to lift Anral with both hands, break through millions of layers of space with a single punch, and easily make Anral sink by several meters according to the myths. There was another god that was similar to the ancient god of strength, the low-level main god, Hercules. However, Hercules was just like a nobody compared to the ancient god of strength. Hercules had achieved godhood through his mastery of the laws of strength, while the ancient god of strength had an inherent mastery of the origin of strength, which was the source of all strength. Lin Li initially hoped that he would be able to battle the masters of all four elemental laws, but he didn't expect to face the ancient god of strength. While feeling disappointed, he also felt a little vexed. If he had guessed correctly, the ancient god of strength could not be easily suppressed by the Mount Tai Mageth. Strictly speaking, Lin Li's Mount Tai Mageth was very similar to the origin of strength of the ancient god of strength. Although Lin Li was indeed the one who had created the laws of the Mount Tai Mageth, it was very compatible with the nature of the origin of strength. Under such circumstances, it would naturally not be that easy to suppress the ancient god of strength who possessed the origin of strength. Boom! The figure of the ancient god of strength suddenly vanished on the spot, letting out a thunderous roar. Immediately afterwards, a fist that blocked Lin Li's entire field of vision suddenly came crashing towards him almost at the same time as the disappearance of the ancient god of strength occurred. Even though Lin Li's surroundings were still protected by the debris of the stars, the domain world didn't seem to have the slightest effect in blocking the steel punch as it was crushed into pieces. Under the blow from the ancient god of strength, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were actually forced out of Lin Li's domain world. Fortunately, Lin Li had already prepared for this long ago, so he immediately deployed the space robe. As it flickered, he vanished right on the spot and dodged the ancient god of strength's punch. When Lin Li's figure appeared in another direction, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. The mere punch of the ancient god of strength made Lin Li feel a sense of danger that he hadn't felt before in his previous battles with the 2 ancient gods. He was certain that his body would have been blown to pieces if he had taken that punch, and even his sanctuary-level soul, which was said to be indestructible, would not be able to avoid annihilation. It was not that the ancient god of strength was necessarily more powerful than the previous 2 ancient gods, but rather his fighting method was indeed mind-boggling and vexing for a mage like Lin Li. There was a saying in Anral that mages were the nemesis of warriors, because warriors had to fight in close combat in order for their attacks to be effectively lethal. However, there was also another saying that warriors were the nemesis of mages, because once a warrior got close to the fragile bodies of the mages would be doomed. It was like how fire and water would cancel out each other, but once a fire was big enough, it would be able to vaporize water. Likewise, when there was a large amount of water, it would be able to put out flames. Hence, there was no such thing as a nemesis and whatnot, and everything boiled down to strength. Regardless of profession, as long as one was strong enough, they would be the nemesis of their enemies. However, the issue was that if it was a field that Lin Li was familiar with, he would at least be confident in dealing with it even if his enemy was powerful. However, the ancient god of strength was stronger than him, and even mastered laws in a field that he wasn't familiar with. Hence, he was undoubtedly Lin Li's nemesis. Lin Li was now facing a warrior that was much stronger than him, so the ancient god of strength was definitely considered his nemesis. At the beginning, Lin Li had once relied on the strength of his body to defeat a mage like himself. However, His close combat skills were insufficient for dealing with a powerhouse like the ancient god of strength. The ancient god of strength's punch missed, and he immediately sensed where Lin Li was moving. Without even looking, he turned around and launched another punch. The massive power broke through the air, and there wasn't a trace of combat energy at all. However, a terrifying force blasted at Lin Li across the air. Lin Li's figure flashed, and he emerged from the void. Once again, he felt the sense of extreme danger, followed by a heavy blow to his domain world, which had just regained a little stability. He didn't dare to stop here at all, and hurriedly activated his space robe in a bid to move farther away this time so that he could buy himself some time for a counterattack. However, the ancient god of strength that had launched an attack through the air suddenly reached his hands out in front of him, and he ripped the space apart to form a spatial rift in an instant. Lin Li could easily open a spatial rift, but the one that the ancient god of strength ripped open had pierced through countless layers of space and spread towards Lin Li. This time, Lin Li couldn't even unleash his space robe. Due to the fact that the space had been destroyed by the ancient god of strength, his flashing movements could only push him towards the ancient god of strength. It was just like opening a hole in the basin and letting all the water in it flow towards the hole. Besides, once the power in the spatial rift spread towards his body, it would be even more terrifying than any artifact. Even his domain world would have to be torn together with it. Lin Li didn't dare to resist it with his body as he quickly dodged aside while pointing the Helios scepter forward, after which a 100-meter-long light and darkness sword slashed at the ancient god of strength. However, Lin Li knew very well that the light and darkness sword wouldn't be able to hurt the ancient god of strength at all, and that the so-called counterattack was only to gain some opportunity. Indeed, when facing the light and darkness sword, the ancient god of strength had a look of disdain on his face, and he directly reached his hand out to grab it. It was one of the strongest attacks that Lin Li relied on, and yet the ancient god of strength managed to grab it with just one hand. Besides, he seemed to be completely relaxed, as if he caught something trivial. Immediately afterwards, the ancient god of strength humped coldly and crushed the light and darkness sword, even though he seemed to have only grasped it with some force. The light and darkness sword, which was more than 100 meters long, started shattering, and black and white light fragments scattered in all directions like butterflies. At the same time, the figure of the ancient god of strength also passed through the thousands of black and white fragments, rushing towards the front of Lin Li. He then smashed his palm against Lin Li's head. When his palm landed, he had already sealed the space with the power of his fingers, making it difficult for one to fly, let alone escape by teleportation. Lin Li immediately felt that the surrounding space seemed to have frozen all of a sudden, and even the air felt like a stiff iron plate. It was as if the power of his Mount Tai Mageth had engulfed his body, making it difficult for him to even move a finger. In the face of the huge palm that came smashing downwards, Lin Li had no choice but to condense his world domain and catalyze the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars to the maximum. The entire world domain had already been shrunk to the smallest size possible. At the same time, it was also the sturdiest it could be. If the world sword was said to be the strongest attack, the world domain was now the strongest defense. However, even Lin Li himself was unsure if such a high degree of defense was enough to withstand the force of a single blow from the ancient god of strength, let alone counterattack. Although the power of the ancient god of strength was not complete, it definitely had an overpowering edge over Lin Li, so it wouldn't be that easy to counterattack. Lin Li had just gotten ready when the ancient god of strength's attack struck him. Next, his giant palm landed on Lin Li's domain world with a loud boom. However, the strike did not send Lin Li flying like a ball. Although he was in midair, there was a sudden force coming from below, which surged upwards and withstood the blow for him. With that boom, Lin Li still felt as if his body was being compressed, even though he was isolated by the domain world. The impact of the attack had also caused his domain world to crumble, while the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were smashed out. However, just as the domain world was about to shatter, Lin Li seized the moment to put his ability to move and flashes to use by vanishing right on the spot. However, although he had left, the domain world was still there. Immediately afterwards, his domain world flickered again. It turned out that it had been detonated by Lin Li, causing the world laws to erupt in a manner that was even more terrifying than the explosion resulting from the conflict of the power of light and darkness. It was almost on par with the severity of the self-destruction of a sanctuary powerhouse. Of course, detonating one's domain world was not something that could be done casually, as the domain world was not a type of magic spell that could be cast when needed. After a sanctuary powerhouse stepped into the sanctuary realm, they'd begin to build their own domain world based on their understanding of the rules. Once the domain world was established, it would exist in perpetuity and continue to be strengthened as its master's comprehension of laws deepened. Hence, It could be said that the domain world was the second life of a sanctuary powerhouse, something akin to a magical crystal that a sanctuary powerhouse has condensed outside of his body. The domain world could be broken, but it could still be repaired after some time. However, once it was destroyed, it would truly be irreparable. Hence, the loss of a domain world through self-detonation would probably be second only to the self-destruction of the mana core for mages. Yet, Lin Li resolutely detonated his own domain world, as if it didn't belong to him at all. However, the power released by his domain world had indeed played a significant role. At least it had put the ancient god of strength in a disheveled state. When the figure of the ancient god of strength emerged from the light, his body was already battered with wounds, and one of his arms was even badly hurt to the point that only his bones were left. Unfortunately, this degree of injury was nothing to the ancient god of strength, and the other wounds on his body had also healed rapidly. In fact, even his arm, which only had its bones left, was soon covered with a layer of muscle, followed by another layer of skin. On the other hand, Lin Li wiped the bloodstains at the corner of his mouth. Although he was as pale as a sheet, he nevertheless raised his arm steadily, and quickly drew a maggoth out of thin air in front of himself. Although the fight with the ancient god of strength didn't last for long, Lin Li had already gained some understanding of the origin of strength, and finally had a plan for modifying the Mount Tai maggoth. However, drawing a maggoth required time regardless of how quick he might be. The ancient god of strength clearly wouldn't give Lin Li the time he needed. In fact, while the wounds on his body were still healing, the ancient god of strength had already launched another attack on Lin Li. The ancient god of strength pressed his fingers together and slashed his palm towards Lin Li in midair, after which a ray of light immediately shot at Lin Li. It wasn't combat energy, but an attack that was purely triggered with strength, similar to the way one could fan some wind with his or her palm. However, the power of the ancient god of strength was far beyond the simple action of waving his hand. Lin Li didn't dare to stop drawing the maggoth. With a mere thought in mind, the debris of the stars, rebirth, darted out and transformed into a mountain peak to meet the attack of the ancient god of strength. There was a loud, explosive boom, and the mountain peak that rebirth had transformed into crumbled almost immediately upon contact. It was as if it was made of clay. Immediately afterwards, the debris of the stars, polar snow, too, darted out, and a solid crystal-like ice wall supported the back of the crumbling mountain peak. However, the ice wall made of polar snow shattered like glass immediately, unable to hold up for even a second. Gloomy dark, holy light thunderbolt, and several other pieces of the debris of the stars darted out one after another in a defensive state, ready to take on the attack of the ancient god of strength. With the destruction of each layer of defense, Lin Li would involuntarily spew a mouthful of blood. His mental strength was continuously shaken, and it left him with a splitting headache. However, even so, he didn't stop moving his hands, and was still continuously drawing magic symbols in pattern after pattern. Although the maggoth had yet to be completed, the dense and rich mana fluctuations had already spread out in all directions like water ripples. Even the ripples that were spreading in space could clearly be seen distorting under the suppression. With the fluctuations, a terrifying power that seemed to be able to combine heaven and earth began to gradually accumulate on the maggoth. Now that the ancient god of strength finally had a chance to break free after having been suppressed for thousands of years, he naturally wouldn't let it go. After sensing the threat of the maggoth, the ancient god of strength immediately lost his sanity and charged towards Lin Li, bombarding him with attacks at full force in a bid to interrupt the drawing of the maggoth. All of a sudden, Lin Li was surrounded by the shadows of the ancient god of strength, and the attacks from the ancient god of strength were like a tidal wave, almost completely submerging Lin Li's figure. A terrifying power that seemed to be able to destroy the earth emerged from each punch that the ancient god of strength threw. Several cracks appeared in the space, almost depriving Lin Li of the space that he was currently in. In the face of the berserk ancient god of strength, Lin Li had no choice but to turn the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars into 7 rings of light of different colors that revolved around him, resisting the storm-like attacks. Although the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars was massive, Lin Li couldn't fully exert it. Whenever the debris of the stars suffered a heavy blow, a large hole would seem to form in his soul. Although the ancient god of strength was not any more powerful than the previous 2 ancient gods, the pressure it put on Lin Li was far greater. Fortunately, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were strong enough, otherwise, they would have been blown to pieces by the ancient god of strength. As Lin Li drew the last magic symbol, the magical elements in the space converged into a thunderstorm that surged into the maggoth, causing it to shine brightly immediately while exuding a dense force. The entire space seemed to have solidified immediately, and the ancient god of strength froze in midair, his outstretched fist still trembling slightly. Immediately afterwards, the mageths that were shining brilliantly flew out from in front of Lin Li and covered the ancient god of strength. The mageths seemed to have turned into mana chains that intertwined around the ancient god of strength's body. The numerous star-like magical runes penetrated the body of the ancient god of strength and sealed his power completely. Faced with the suppression of the magic runes, the body of the ancient god of strength shuddered, and the power within his body emerged continuously, causing the light of the mageths to flicker incessantly. However, the ancient god of strength's resistance seemed rather futile under the suppression of the mageth, and the power that emerged was getting weaker and weaker. While watching the ancient god of strength struggle, Lin Li panted heavily and tried to bear with the excruciating pain in his head that made him feel as if his head was about to shatter. At the same time, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars hovered around his body like satellites. Suppress it, Lin Li thought to himself, and he made a magic gesture with his hands in front of his chest, after which the mageth immediately emitted an even more dazzling ray of light. In an instant, even the ancient god of strength's aura seemed to have vanished from this space, while the massive body of the ancient god of strength shriveled up like a deflated ball under the engulfment of the mana. However, in a few moments, the ancient god of strength, who had just attacked Lin Li so intensely to the point that Lin Li was breathless, turned into a mass of light that contained the origin of strength. Lin Li grasped the mass of light and immediately channeled his mental strength into it in order to understand and grasp the mysteries of the origin of strength. If a sword sage could obtain the origin of strength, ascending to godhood probably wouldn't be difficult. Although Lin Li was not a warrior, he would still benefit greatly from this origin of strength. He might not have the combat power of a sword sage, but at the very least he would be able to deal with opponents who mastered such nomological power with greater ease. Besides, this understanding and mastery of the origin of strength also gave Lin Li's Mount Tai Mageth more room for improvement, allowing him to gain more insights in the field of inscription. Of course, when Lin Li similarly placed the same origin of strength into the Ring of Endless Storm, the space began to change immediately afterwards too. The sky and the earth seemed to have been kneaded together like dough, causing the two to be indistinguishable. In such a chaotic space, the various magical elements began to become extremely chaotic too, as the earth, fire, wind, and water elements intertwined and transformed, so much so that it was impossible to grasp the power within. In a space as such, it was simply impossible for mages to mobilize the surrounding magical elements, and it was very likely that the mobilized fire elements would turn into water elements in the next moment, and so on. As a result, the mages would face continuous backlash because of the failure of casting. Immediately afterwards, an ancient god with 4 faces and 8 arms appeared in that distorted space. It was the ancient god of chaos that Saint Edmund of the Illuminati had continuously summoned in the form of statues on several occasions previously. He had an inherent control of the origin of chaos and possessed the bizarre ability to defy all laws. Without a single moment of delay, Lin Li pointed the Helios scepter forward, and a gigantic light and darkness sword immediately slashed through space towards the ancient god of chaos. Immediately afterwards, he held the crossbow of reincarnation and placed the debris of the stars, thunderbolt, on it as if it were an arrow. As the crossbow mechanism was triggered, it turned into a bolt of lightning that darted towards the ancient god of chaos with a whistle. Lin Li was well aware that it would be difficult for the power of the light and darkness sword to pose an effective threat to an enemy of such a high level like the ancient gods. Hence, after using the light and darkness sword, he immediately attacked using the power of the debris of the stars, thunderbolt. The light and darkness sword was just a smokescreen for thunderbolt. As expected, a peculiar fluctuation suddenly radiated from the ancient god of chaos body as soon as the light and darkness sword approached it, throwing the space into jeopardy as chaos broke out. When the fluctuation came into contact with the light and darkness sword, the initially solid light and darkness sword began flickering. Lin Li could clearly sense that the structure of the laws in the light and darkness sword had begun to lose its stability because of the bizarre fluctuations. The powers of light and darkness, which were initially balanced, began to clash uncontrollably too. With a loud explosive sound, the light and darkness sword lost control as the conflicting forces of light and darkness finally resulted in an explosion. However, the power of the explosion was far from being enough to hurt the ancient god of chaos. In the light of the explosion of the light and darkness sword, the thunderbolt that turned into a sharp sword immediately pierced outwards and struck the ancient god of chaos in his chest, catching the latter off guard. However, seeing that thunderbolt was about to strike the ancient god of chaos, a strange feeling suddenly rose in Lin Li's heart. Subsequently, he saw that thunderbolt was whistling towards him. Fortunately, Lin Li reacted quickly enough to launch his ability to move like the flash as he quickly dodged to the side by more than 10 meters. Watching his afterimage getting pierced by thunderbolt, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. If he hadn't dodged in time, he would have probably died at his own hands. Clearly, the laws that the ancient god of chaos had jeopardized were not just the four elemental laws, but also the laws of space and time, which had all become chaotic under his influence. In fact, even Lin Li was uncertain if Thunderbolt was really targeting him, and merely took a gamble to dodge to the side in a flash. Only when the power of Thunderbolt weakened slightly did Lin Li finally recall Thunderbolt. He then turned his head to look at the ancient god of chaos, only to see that all 8 of his arms were flailing about incessantly while various powerful magic spells were launched at Lin Li. The magic spells cast by the ancient god of chaos seemed to be ordinary elemental magic spells, such as Meteor Shower, Firestorm, Destruction Thunderbolt, and so on. However, Lin Li could sense that the laws in those magic spells were extremely bizarre and chaotic. Each of those magic spells contained numerous types of nomological power. Besides, the laws were continuously changing, making it difficult for him to respond effectively. Seeing this situation, Lin Li hurriedly released 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, Holy Light and Gloomy Dark, which turned into 2 1,000-meter-long pythons that intertwined and circled around his body. At the same time, the debris of the stars, Nothingness, turned into a spear that appeared in his hand. After injecting a massive amount of mana into it, Lin Li swung it towards the ancient god of chaos in the distance. The magic storm of the ancient god of chaos blasted at the twin serpents of light and darkness that Holy Light and Gloomy Dark had transformed into. In an instant, it resulted in violent tremors of the space. Besides, the spear-formed nothingness that Lin Li swung out also caused a large spatial rift to appear in the spot where the ancient god of chaos was, as if it were the maw of a gigantic beast that was about to devour the ancient god of chaos in one mouthful. Without the Mount Tai Mageth, even the domain world couldn't recover from the previous self-detonation. However, with the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, Lin Li and the ancient god of chaos exchanged several blows. It wasn't that the ancient god of chaos was less powerful than the first 3 ancient gods that had appeared earlier, but rather the growth that Lin Li had achieved through fighting the first 3 ancient gods had already reached a shocking extent. The growth was not limited to the field of inscription, but rather entailed the thorough understanding of the origin of laws, and the experience he had gained from fighting with the ancient gods allowed Lin Li to greatly improve his abilities in magic combat. The ancient gods were once above the other gods, even if their power had been greatly weakened. Ancient gods with complete willpower still made for terrifying opponents. There was probably nothing in Anral that could be better for honing one's skills than fighting with the ancient gods. If Lin Li's strength didn't improve with such a good opportunity in hand, it would really be a great disappointment to the immortal king in Garesco. With the intention to train himself, Lin Li did not use the Mount Tai Mageth even in the face of an extremely dangerous situation. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were his strongest backup that he could fall back on. With the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, Lin Li's battle with the ancient god of chaos lasted for 2 hours, which was quite an impressive achievement. Although Lin Li was disheveled, which was a stark contrast to the ancient god of chaos who did not seem to have suffered any damage at all, Lin Li was only a high-level sanctuary powerhouse who had yet to reach the level of a demigod. Being able to hold out for such a long time against the ancient god of chaos with his current strength was absolutely unbelievable to everyone. However, in reality, Lin Li still wasn't satisfied with the situation. In his opinion, his greatest goal was to defeat this ancient god of chaos by relying on his own power without even using the debris of the stars. Of course, Lin Li was very clear of the reality he was subjected to. After all, the ancient god of chaos was a true ancient god. Even though his power had been weakened, the divinity he possessed didn't decrease because of it. With Lin Li's current abilities, it wouldn't be realistic to try to defeat the ancient god of chaos without using the power of the debris of the stars. Sensing that he could no longer comprehend anything else from the ancient god of chaos, and that he was reaching the limit of what he could withstand, Lin Li finally decided to end the battle. However, he still didn't bother to draw the Mount Tai Mageth. Instead, he started fine-tuning his mana to manifest the Mount Tai Mageth in the form of a magic spell. With a point of the Helios Scepter, a magical wave that was similar to the Mount Tai Mageth began blasting towards the ancient god of chaos. The ancient god of chaos was naturally unwilling to be suppressed again. Thus, he immediately activated his ability and began to distort all the laws in his space. With the distortion, the space became somewhat illusory, and his figure turned vague as if the clouds were about to dissipate. However, after such a long time of fighting, Lin Li had already gained a considerable understanding of the ancient god of chaos tricks. Although he didn't dare to say that he definitely had a means to suppress the ancient god of chaos, he wouldn't be fooled easily. The magic spell that contained the aura of the Mount Tai Magath immediately blasted into the distorted space. First, a powerful force emerged, and the warped laws were instantly corrected. Although the power of the ancient god of chaos subverted all the laws, the power of chaos was still a type of law. Since the laws were traceable, Lin Li just had to find the laws within. Besides, Lin Li might not have seen through the laws of chaos of the ancient god of chaos, but he had also mastered a certain law through the battle. Hence, he naturally had a means to restrain it for the time being. With the blasting and invasion of the magic spell, the illusory-looking space immediately solidified, and everything seemed to have been restored to its original appearance. Although the power of the magic spell had only provided a moment of correction, the laws soon emerged under the power of suppression. They converged and condensed into chains that began intertwining around the ancient god of chaos, after which countless magic runes penetrated the body of the ancient god of chaos. Finally, the law origin that the ancient god of strength had left behind after being suppressed landed in Lin Li's hands. It was a ball of light that resembled chaos. Just like before, Lin Li immediately channeled his mental strength into the origin of chaos to conduct a detailed check and examination before stowing it away in the ring of endless storm. After doing that, Lin Li felt his vision turning blurry, and there were changes in the scene in this space. A new ancient god didn't appear, and the surroundings suddenly reverted to the study that he had initially stepped into. I finally passed the test. Lin Li was overjoyed. Passing the test meant that he could see the figure with the back facing him, and obtain the answers to his questions. However, immediately afterwards, Lin Li discovered that something was amiss because the decor and furnishings of the study actually seemed brand new, with no signs of wear and tear that should have appeared after the passage of thousands of years. Although there were some magic spells that could prolong the life of some items, signs of wear and tear could never be removed. While Lin Li was feeling puzzled, he suddenly felt a trace of vigilance, followed by a terrifying force that was surging towards him immediately afterwards. Thunderbolt. After taking a clear look at what was attacking him, Lin Li was incredibly astonished. He was certain that the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were in his hands. So what was this thunderbolt that was trying to attack him? Fortunately, Lin Li had been keeping his guard up even after he arrived here, which allowed him to react to thunderbolt, which had the shrewdest attacking method. The space robe that he was donning flickered abruptly, and he was already in another spot of the study by the time he appeared again. It's not that easy to get your weapon back. At the same time that Lin Li moved in a flash, the voice that he had heard previously sounded in his mind again. As the voice appeared, the study that had limited room at first immediately became extremely spacious as if it had been inflated. The rows of bookshelves that were near him quickly enlarged and flew into the distance. Immediately afterwards, a figure seemed to have walked out of the illusion and appeared in a spot near him. Garesko. Lin Li couldn't help but call out. The original figure that appeared in front of him turned out to be Garesko, the god of mages who had trained him rigorously countless times in the first floor of the inverted tower. However, the Garesko in front of him was clad in a mage's robe and holding the weapon Lin Li had always dreamed of, the stars of fury. At the same time, the masses of light from the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars also started revolving around Garesko's body like satellites. When Lin Li saw the view of his back outside the study earlier on, Garesko's was the first person that came to his mind. Hence, Lin Li wasn't too shocked to see Garesko's shadow here. However, he was puzzled as to how the stars of fury had ended up with Garesko. According to the legends of Anril and the information he had received from various sources, Lin Li was certain that the stars of fury and the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were weapons that belonged to the immortal king. Even though Lin Li could ascertain that the stars of fury was only a condensation of mana, he didn't expect it to appear in Garesko's hands. Is the relationship between Garesko and the immortal king a type of tacit historical legacy relationship like that between me and Garesko? Lin Li couldn't help but think of a possibility. According to the history of Anril, it seemed that Garesko was born in the Felon Kingdom only after the immortal king had gone missing. Hence, Garesko certainly could not have become a disciple of the immortal king like High Lord Osric. Thus, the only possibility left was that Garesko should have obtained the immortal king's legacy through a certain opportunity, such as the Sky Castle, and the place where the gods were now being suppressed. Even though Lin Li could somewhat explain the relationship between Garesko and the immortal king with such a conjecture, he was still puzzled by what Garesko said. What does he mean, take back my own weapon? Doesn't the Stars of Fury belong to the immortal king? The last time I really had the Stars of Fury was when I was playing the Endless World game using the Hunter Avatar. Does Garesko know about what happened before I transmigrated? Lin Li's transmigration to this world was his greatest secret, which he had never mentioned to anyone. Meanwhile, Garesko the god of mages came into existence more than 1,000 years ago, and there was no overlap in the time of his existence and that of Lin Li, so there was no way he could have known of Lin Li's transmigration. Or is it just a slip of the tongue? Lin Li really couldn't figure it out and had no choice but to attribute it to that reason. Anyway, no matter what, he did want to obtain the Stars of Fury and make it his personal weapon, so Garesko wouldn't be wrong if his words were interpreted in this way. However, Lin Li was soon no longer in the mood to consider this issue, because Garesko's shadow had already raised his Stars of Fury. Damn it, the combination of the Stars of Fury and the debris of the stars is powerful enough to annihilate even the Dragon of Destruction. Lin Li immediately broke out in a cold sweat, and could no longer be bothered to think about the doubts he had as he frantically channeled all his attention to the manipulation of his 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Although the Stars of Fury that Garesko's shadow was holding was not real, Lin Li was well aware that even if it was just a Stars of Fury that was condensed with mana, the attack launched with it by a powerhouse of such a high level would not be inferior to the real thing at all. It was not Lin Li's first time seeing such a means. The first was in the 7-realm spiral of the Sky Castle, followed by the time in the Well of the Sun where the Hunter Shadow used it too. Hence, Lin Li didn't dare to underestimate the Stars of Fury that Garesko's shadow was holding now. At this moment, Garesko also finally activated the trigger of the Stars of Fury crossbow, and Polar Snow, which had already been placed on top, immediately darted towards Lin Li. The debris of the stars, Polar Snow, which was powered by the Stars of Fury, released a power that was far different from that of Lin Li's manipulation of Polar Snow. After leaving the Stars of Fury, Polar Snow dared towards Lin Li in the form of a sharp arrow, and the surrounding temperature also instantly plunged to 0. The air was filled with glistening ice crystals, and even the entire space was frozen to the point of being covered with cracks. From Lin Li's point of view, there was nothing but a huge silver wave that seemed to be surging towards him, like it was sweeping through the world. Polar Snow was at the center of the silver wave, charging towards him with a terrifying power that seemed to freeze everything in its path. With the knowledge of the debris of the stars, Polar Snow, Lin Li was sure that even gods would be drowned out by the silver wave, and even their solid divine kingdoms would be frozen and shattered into powder. On the other hand, a high-level sanctuary powerhouse like himself would probably be unable to last even a second before dying. Polar Snow, Raging Flames. Lin Li immediately activated 2 of his pieces of the debris of the stars. Instead of releasing an extreme chilliness, Polar Snow turned into a huge wave that collided with the silver wave, while Raging Flames attached itself to the wave, making it seem as if it was a sea of flames. Without the Stars of Fury, Lin Li wasn't confident of fighting against Garesko's Polar Snow using only his Polar Snow. Hence, he added Raging Flames to his own Polar Snow, and combined the power of ice and fire. In the eyes of others, ice and fire might be incompatible, but when Lin Li first obtained Polar Snow and Raging Flames, the power of these 2 pieces of the debris of the stars had even formed a natural domain of water and fire. Lin Li's current combination of the 2 was based off a similar law structure that he had comprehended from the natural domain of water and fire. In the blink of an eye, the silver wave formed by Garesko's Polar Snow, and the sea of burning flames formed by Lin Li's Raging Flames, and Polar Snow collided with each other violently. The silver wave rolled with the power to freeze everything in its path, while the sea of burning flames emitted blazing heat while containing the power of water that eroded everything. The collision of the 2 forces did not cause much of a shocking movement, but anyone could see that there was a vigorous fight between the silver wave and red flames. The extreme chilliness emitted by the silver wave froze the flames, but the scorching heat made the silver wave engulfed by the flames, as if it was covered in a layer of fiery red. If Lin Li used purely the power of the red flames, the sea of fire would probably soon turn into an ice field. Due to the buffer effect resulting from the power of Polar Snow, the power of the flames was maximized to an extent that it could compete with Polar Snow that was powered by the Stars of Fury. The space where the 2 forces collided was instantly filled with cracking sounds of things breaking. It was an erosive power that even the layers of spatial barriers could not withstand. In the center of the collision of the 2 forces, almost all matter ceased to exist, and even countless layers of the endless void were shattered by the impact. If someone used the Void of the Stars technique here, they would probably be instantly turned into flying ashes by the impact along with the void that their physical body was attached to. Using the power of the 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, Polar Snow and Raging Flames, to resist the power of Garesko's Polar Snow, that was powered by the Stars of Fury, was already quite an achievement for Lin Li. It was the various gains and significant improvement in strength he had obtained from the battle with the ancient gods that allowed him to achieve that. However, Lin Li naturally would not be satisfied with the status quo. What he wanted to do now was to defeat the Garesko, who was holding the Stars of Fury, in front of him, and not just contend with him. Hence, While blocking the incoming polar snow, Lin Li raised the Helios scepter in his hand, and a huge vortex appeared in the sky, after which several large pillars of lightning smashed into Garesko with loud roars. Although the Stars of Fury was held only by Garesko's shadow, it was still a shadow that belonged to the god of mages, Garesko. Of course, it had more than just those means. After the attack by polar snow was blocked, Garesko merely held the Spear of Nothingness in his other hand, and slashed it against the sky while facing the huge pillars of lightning. With his movements, a spatial rift appeared in the sky above his head, and devoured the hundreds and thousands of lightning pillars. Under Garesko's manipulation, the debris of the stars, Rebirth and Thunderbolt, flew towards the Stars of Fury, after which a yellow ray of light intertwined with a turquoise ray of light, turning into two sharp arrows that darted towards Lin Li. Damn it, you're just leveraging on the Stars of Fury. Seeing this scene, Lin Li couldn't help but curse in his heart. With the Stars of Fury, a single piece of the debris of the stars would possess terrifying power, and now that there were two pieces of the debris of the stars being shot in unison, the power was probably enough to slay gods. However, there was no point in being jealous. Lin Li was now facing the god of mages who had the Stars of Fury and the debris of the stars. Fortunately, Garesko wasn't too ruthless, and the strength of the shadow itself wasn't that terrifying, as it was only at the higher end of the sanctuary realm. CHCK Faru Street Rise on No, V, L, Bin, C0M. Thus, Lin Li still saw some hope of winning. Otherwise, if the strength of the shadow was greater, Lin Li would be better off giving up. The debris of the stars, Rebirth, contained the laws of Earth and had the power to control the growth of all things, making it the most bizarre power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. The debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, contained the elemental laws of wind and the destructive power of wind and lightning. It was the sharpest of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. The combination of these 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, and the combination of earth and wind, life and destruction, was not a simple addition of powers. How do I deal with this? Lin Li waved the Helios scepter, and 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, Holy Light and Polar Snow, formed a 1,000-meter-long light and darkness sword that took on the attack of Rebirth and Thunderbolt. At the same time, the debris of the stars, Nothingness, immediately split into thousands of rays of light that formed countless spatial rifts in the space, making it seem like a sieve. The countless spatial rifts began devouring the power emanating from Garesko's Rebirth and Thunderbolt like a swarm of cannibalistic ants. Immediately afterwards, the light and darkness sword collided with Garesko's attack, causing massive power to emerge immediately. The aftershocks that spread around even dispersed the silver waves and burning sea of flames, while the debris of the stars began flying backwards. A large vortex was formed in the center of the collision, just like a black hole in the void that was devouring every ounce of magic around it. Even Lin Li, who was still far away, felt a pulling force that was trying to drag him into the spatial vortex. No matter what, he had finally blocked Garesko's attack, which made Lin Li, who did not have the Stars of Fury, feel rather smug and conceited. However, immediately afterwards, he turned as pale as a sheet when he saw Garesko placing the debris of the stars, Polar Snow, Raging Flames, Rebirth, and Thunderbolt on the Stars of Fury. Are you kidding me? The power of 4 pieces of the debris of the stars, and 4 pieces of the debris of the stars that contain elemental rules, is more than enough to slaughter even the gods. This test is out to kill me. Faced with this terrifying scene, all Lin Li could do was curse Garesko in his heart for being such a psychopath while releasing all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Under Lin Li's control, the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars was connected to become a unified entity instead of 7 separate pieces of the debris of the stars. The laws contained in the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were the 7 basic laws that constituted the world. Lin Li's mastery and comprehension of the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars was the very reason he could create his world domain. However, the current 7 pieces of the debris of the stars did not form a domain world. There was an origin to the name debris of the stars. Each piece of the debris of the stars contained a basic law that constituted part of the world, and when the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were placed together, they would form a star core with a complete set of laws. The star core was known as the seed that gives birth to a world and the basic core that could create a perfect world like Anral. Hence, it was also called the heart of the world. With his mastery of the 7 laws, Lin Li could create a world domain, and also turn his world domain into world sword, but he was far from reaching the level of being able to condense the heart of the world. The real heart of the world was something that even the gods couldn't possess or manipulate. Hence, the divine kingdom created by gods would be stabilized by the twin serpents of light and darkness. Lin Li was now entirely using the power of the debris of the stars, turning the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars into the star core. However, This star core still couldn't be compared to a real star core, because it was akin to something that had been broken and pieced back together. Although the appearance remained the same, it would still be impossible to ignore the cracks. Of course, even if it was just a star core that was pieced together, it already had the shape of the heart of the world after the 7 laws influenced each other. The power it contained was shockingly massive. If it were a real star core, even existences that were as powerful as gods would seem like ants in the face of it. Hence, even if the star core formed by the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars contained only 1% of the true star core, it would definitely be a power that made even gods shudder. That was already the most powerful attack that Lin Li could release at the moment. Even when he'd been in the endless world, he had never done such a thing. Even though his hunter Avatar in the endless world had the stars of fury and the debris of the stars, and there had been times when the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were launched in unison, he had never tried to form a star core with all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. After the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars converged into a mass of light, in front of Lin Li, the entire space began flickering with some illusory shadows. Under the influence of that power, it was as if there was a world that had been created in this space, and was constantly being developed into a perfect world like Anral. However, it was merely the influence brought about by the mana fluctuations of the star core. The illusory world seemed intangible and susceptible to being blown away by the wind. Garesco's stars of fury, which was right across from Lin Li, had also launched those 4 pieces of the debris of the stars. The power of the 4 pieces of the debris of the stars representing the 4 laws of earth, fire, water, and wind fused together perfectly thanks to the stars of fury. Similarly, they constituted an elemental world that was emitting terrifying fluctuations. At this moment, Lin Li felt as if the world was crushing him as the ground below him began trembling vigorously, while thunder and lightning filled the sky above his head. The ocean was burning with blazing hot flames and full of waves that were blown up by the gale. Although Lin Li was carrying out an extraordinary operation by piecing the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars together to form the star core, he still didn't feel confident about facing Garesco's attacks. After all, Garesco had the stars of fury, which resulted in a world of a difference that left Lin Li feeling hopeless. However, giving up was obviously impossible for Lin Li. Despite his despair, he was bent on doing his best to fight. He knew very well that although it was just Garesco's test, it was not to be taken lightly, and the consequences of failure would be more than just having to redo it all over again. His soul might really be destroyed. Lin Li chanted an incantation with a special rhythm, and continuously catalyzed the power of the star core, making the illusory world and the space seem almost realistic. Under his stimulation, the star core, which was composed of 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, began emitting rays of light like a new star, which would shock one's soul. They then darted towards the 4 pieces of the debris of the stars that Garesco launched. It was a collision of 2 worlds. The star core that was formed by the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars collided with the elemental world that was formed by the 4 pieces of the debris of the stars. All of a sudden, all Lin Li could see was lightning, a roaring sea of fire with huge raging waves, and thunderbolts falling like raindrops from the sky together with meteors. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were at the center, emitting a light that would sometimes shrink to a mere circle, and sometimes expand into countless rays of light. It seemed as if Lin Li had blocked Garesco's attack, but he didn't feel a trace of relief at all. He hadn't forgotten that while he had used all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, there were still 3 with Garesco. As expected, Lin Li suddenly discovered that the ground beneath his feet had turned pitch black at some point, as if he was standing on the endless void. At the same time, Lin Li felt an extremely familiar force coming from behind him, which was actually emitted from the debris of the stars, holy light and nothingness. Without a doubt, it was the power of nothingness that caused holy light to appear behind Lin Li, forcing him into a desperate situation immediately. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars in front of him were fighting hard against the elemental world, formed by the 4 pieces of the debris of the stars. However, 3 other pieces of the debris of the stars appeared behind him. What else did Lin Li have that could contend with the 3 pieces of the debris of the stars? Even if the 3 pieces of the debris of the stars were stimulated in an ordinary manner, and not launched with the stars of fury, Lin Li didn't have anything that could contend with them. When he felt the force of the 3 pieces of the debris of the stars coming from behind, Lin Li clenched his jaw, and quickly flew towards the front like a bolt of lightning. The battle between the elemental world and the star core caused the surrounding space to crumble and collapse before regenerating. Even gods would be reduced to ashes when they arrived in the center. However, Lin Li dashed straight into the center of the collision of the 2 worlds without any hesitation, as if he totally didn't sense the massive threat in front of him that wasn't inferior to that behind him. Since Lin Li dared to rush into the center, he naturally wasn't completely unprepared. Just as the horrifying pressure was about to rip his body apart, he suddenly vanished right on the spot in a flash. Immediately afterwards, the star core, that was fighting against the elemental world, expanded rapidly as if it was filled with air. It was as if a new world was about to be born. The enormous power of the star core emerged with a great force that seemed capable of sweeping everything away. The lightning in the sky dispersed and devoured the sea of fire and waves that were swarming over. It then caused the 3 pieces of the debris of the stars behind Lin Li to be fixed in midair. The star core expanded incessantly together with the space. When the star core became the size of a planet, it still seemed small and somewhat insignificant in this space. At this juncture, Lin Li, who had just vanished, was actually standing on the huge planet. Clearly, his entry had triggered the changes in the star core and caused it to turn into a planet. The majority of the planet that the star core had turned into was covered by an azure sea, with the land being covered with volcanoes that were erupting incessantly. There were also grass and trees growing rapidly in most places. The vast forests and grasslands had turned the mainland green, but the land on both ends was still covered with ice and snow. Anyone from the same origin as Lin Li would be able to recognize at a glance that the huge planet was Earth, which he had transmigrated from. There was no other solution. In order to stimulate the power of the star core to the maximum, Lin Li had no choice but to shape the star core based on the model that he remembered. Of course, it was just a pseudo-Earth that looked exactly the same as it did in the prehistoric times. In fact, there was no other life form other than the plants. After all, Lin Li was just a sanctuary powerhouse who wasn't capable of creating real life yet. Instead of resisting the attack, Lin Li immediately opened a rift in the power of the planet before Garesko could react, allowing the elemental world and the 3 pieces of the debris of the stars behind him to enter. Although Garesko's shadow's competency was similar to Lin Li's, he would probably be able to destroy the planet if he could use the Stars of Fury to release the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Hence, before Garesko used an even more insane method, Lin Li immediately drew all 7 pieces of his debris of the stars to the planet. Although Lin Li had created the planet using the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, it was essentially the same as the world domain he created. He was the supreme god of this world, and the controller of everything on the planet. Even a god would be suppressed by the power of this world once he entered. When the elemental world surged into the planet, it immediately brought about a great disaster to the planet. The sky burned and turned into a fiery red color, while the sea began boiling. A large bottomless crack appeared in the earth, and it was as if the planet was about to collapse in the next moment. However, at this moment, Lin Li stood between the heaven and earth, and slowly raised his hand. Without chanting any incantation or releasing any mana fluctuations, the catastrophic scene was erased like words on a blackboard. With the disappearance of the elemental world, Garesko's 4 pieces of the debris of the stars were also revealed. They turned into 4 streams of light that kept shooting through the world, as if they were caged birds that were trying to break free. The other 3 pieces of the debris of the stars that originally attacked Lin Li from behind did not escape that fate, either. This world was Lin Li's home turf, and even though he was facing Garesko, it was ultimately just a shadow of Garesko, and not the real him. Hence, it wasn't that easy for these 7 pieces of the debris of the stars to escape. After keeping the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars in this world, Lin Li immediately increased his control over this world, and continuously stimulated the power of the star core. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars also became more and more sluggish as they flew around in the world, resembling a person who had fallen into a swamp. In the end, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were eventually fixed in the air, no longer able to move an inch despite their continuous trembling. Next, it was the shadow's turn. Now that Lin Li had suppressed the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, Garesko's shadow would no longer be much of a threat to him, even if he had the Stars of Fury. However, just as Lin Li was considering how to deal with Garesko's shadow, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that had been confined suddenly vanished. Lin Li was taken aback because he had already used all his might to confine the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and yet they managed to escape. There was nothing he could do anymore. However, immediately after that, a voice once again surfaced in Lin Li's mind. "Very well, it seems that you didn't disappoint me." Hearing those words, Lin Li felt that he had immediately lost control of the world and the planet as it turned into an illusion, revealing the star core that was situated at the center of the planet. At this juncture, he had freed himself from the world on the planet and watched as it reverted to the star core before splitting into the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that flew back to him. At this moment, Lin Li looked around again, only to realize that he was back in the same study as before, and was still standing in the spot that he had walked towards just now. If not for the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars around him, he would have even thought that the fight just now was simply a dream. Based on what Garesco's shadow had just said, it was obvious that he had passed Garesco's test. Even though he hadn't truly defeated that shadow, he managed to control the shadow's 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Even if the battles he faced next were going to be difficult, the outcome was somewhat certain. When Lin Li looked at the back of the figure seated in the study once again, the familiar-looking figure also turned around at the same time. However, Lin Li was thoroughly surprised to see the true face of the figure, so much so that he almost exclaimed in shock. Deep down, his heart was filled with astonishment because the person that he thought was Garesco had a face that was extremely similar to the Immortal King's. Although Lin Li and Garesco's shadow had been in contact on multiple occasions, the latter's face would be somewhat blurry every single time they met. Hence, Lin Li couldn't see his true face at all, so he was extremely familiar with Garesco's figure, but not at all with his face. What Lin Li found even more unbelievable was the fact that not only did the other party resemble the Immortal King in terms of appearance, he was also almost exactly identical to him. If the figure hadn't been sitting down and wearing a different outfit, Lin Li would have even thought that he was looking at his reflection in the mirror. Even with Lin Li's mental capacity, he felt overwhelmed by the mind-boggling sight in front of him now. The information that had once puzzled him suddenly surfaced in his mind at the moment, and he recalled the statue of the Immortal King that looked exactly identical to him in the Death Rift previously, as well as the Undead Lord's exclamation in the parade square of Alana previously. Why do I look so similar to the Immortal King and Garesco? What is the relationship between the Immortal King and Garesco? How am I related to the two of them? Tried as he might, Lin Li couldn't find the answers to his questions. Regardless of what the relationship between the Immortal King and Garesco was, Lin Li was at least well aware that he couldn't be the reincarnation of either of them, which made the situation even more difficult to explain. At this moment, Garesco turned around to look at Lin Li with a gentle and refined smile on his face, as if he could read Lin Li's mind. He calmly said, I know you have plenty of doubts in mind. Since you've now passed the test, there are some things that I can let you know about. Garesco's words made the dumbfounded Lin Li come back to his senses. When Lin Li's attention was drawn to Garesco's body, he discovered an extremely shocking truth. He discovered that Garesco's shadow, who was sitting across from him at the moment, was clearly different from the shadows he had come in contact with in the past. The current Garesco seemed to have the aura of a real person, unlike a mere shadow that was condensed with mana. However, Lin Li was also certain that it was absolutely impossible for the figure to be the real Garesco. Even though he had never seen the real Garesco before, he knew that Garesco, the god of mages who could be compared to the Immortal King, definitely wouldn't have the magical waves of the figure in front of him. The figure in front of him was not just a shadow. Instead, it seemed more like a living person. The mana fluctuations of its body were much weaker than those of the real Garesco, which Lin Li imagined. Thus, that made Lin Li feel rather doubtful of his previous judgment, and he suspected that the figure wasn't Garesco's shadow. After all, he was familiar only with Garesco's shadow. With that thought in mind, Lin Li stared at the figure and warily asked, Who exactly are you? The figure merely smiled in response to Lin Li's performance and didn't seem to be bothered by it. While putting down the book in his hand, he indifferently said, I was Garesco at the end of the Dark Age. The period when the High Elves ruled Anril was called the Dark Age. According to the High Elves' development, the Dark Age was divided into 3 periods, the early, middle, and late period. The High Elves rose during the early period of the Dark Age, reached their prime in the middle of the Dark Age, and were overthrown at the end of the Dark Age. According to the records of the Supreme Council, Garesco the god of mages was born at the beginning of the end of the Dark Age. In fact, there was another symbol of the Dark Age, and that was the Immortal King, who was the guardian of the High Elves. He had led the High Elves to glory, but his departure also marked the beginning of the decline of the High Elven dynasty, which was also the beginning of the end of the Dark Age. Hence, when he heard the figure say that he was Garesco at the end of the Dark Age, Lin Li was suddenly full of confusion. Garesco is Garesco. What does he mean by saying that he was Garesco at the end of the Dark Age? What a bizarre introduction. The end of the Dark Age. Lin Li grasped the key in his words, and quickly again asked, what about before the end of the Dark Age? While Garesco's introduction was bizarre, Lin Li's question and response was just as strange. It was just like asking someone who they were before they were born, which was simply impossible to answer. In fact, Lin Li realized how strange his question was only after he heard himself. After hearing Lin Li's question, Garesco merely stared at him, and shook his head smilingly without giving a shocking answer. Does he not want to answer, or is he unable to answer? Although Lin Li was a little dissatisfied, he didn't dwell on this issue. After all, Garesco wasn't a prisoner that he had captured. Hence, he had no choice but to put aside that question, and asked, what are you doing here then? Lin Li had always thought that this was the place where the immortal king had suppressed the ancient god of light and imprisoned the gods. Hence, he'd expected the immortal king's shadow to be the one appearing in front of him instead. However, the one standing in front of him now was Garesco, the god of mages. Thus, Lin Li wondered if Garesco had really received the immortal king's inheritance. In fact, there were many similar speculations about Garesco receiving the immortal king's legacy in Anral. Besides, many of the events that Lin Li had experienced seemed to prove that point too. For example, the inverted tower the Garesco city had left behind in the immortal king's sky castle, as well as the images regarding the immortal king in the world created by Garesco. Instead of avoiding the question this time, Garesco said in an indifferent tone, "I've been waiting for you, and I knew you would come." Garesco's answer reminded Lin Li of the purpose of his visit. It was exactly because of the guidance in that world. Garesco's words had now proven that the reason the other party created that world was indeed to attract him here. However, he reckoned that the other party's intention was not as simple as just putting him through a few tests. With Garesco's strength, moving the things here, including the restrained ancient gods, to the inverted tower of the sky castle was not a difficult task at all. Hence, if it had been just a simple test, or a learning experience for Lin Li, he could have just conducted it in the inverted tower. There was no point in expending so much effort to lead him there. At the thought of this, the doubtful look in Lin Li's eyes intensified. He looked at Garesco and asked, "You've been waiting for me here. So what exactly did you guide me here for? Are you just trying to test me?" Garesco shook his head and turned around to scan his surroundings instead of answering Lin Li's question immediately. He then said, "I'm doing this on behalf of someone who wants to apologize to you." Hearing his words, Lin Li couldn't help but frown. Garesco's words were clearly beyond his expectations, as he seemed to be implying that someone else should be aware of his arrival. "Who's that person? Is it the immortal king?" Lin Li was reminded of the records in the canon of the Illuminati, such as the person who suppressed the ancient god of light, saying that another version of himself would return again after a certain number of years. Lin Li didn't think that he would be the reincarnation of the immortal king, because he was well aware of which world he had transmigrated from. All he knew was that his transmigration was very likely to be related to the immortal king, but apart from that, there seemed to be no relation between the two anymore. Besides, Lin Li also noticed that Garesco had mentioned apologizing to him on behalf of someone. What does this apology mean? Could it be that the immortal king is feeling apologetic for leading me to this world without asking for my opinion? Who is that person? Is it the immortal king? Lin Li frantically asked. However, Garesco didn't answer that question, and instead raised his hand to point at everything in the study. He said, "These things here are a form of apology to you from him." In fact, even if Garesco didn't answer, Lin Li could already guess that the person Garesco was talking about was probably the immortal king. However, he couldn't understand what the relationship between Garesco and the immortal king was, and why the one telling him those things was Garesco instead of the immortal king himself. Unfortunately, when Garesco finished that sentence, his figure suddenly became blurry, and he vanished from the room like a plume of smoke in the blink of an eye. Lin Li was the only one left in the room. Dumbfounded, he wanted to reach out to call out to Garesco, but to no avail. Although the conversation they had was too brief, and Garesco's answer was vague and incomplete, the doubts in Lin Li's heart were resolved to a certain extent. For example, that world in the inverted tower was indeed meant to lead him here, and the reason he was there was exactly because the immortal king had left some things behind for him. Of course, Lin Li still had plenty of questions and doubts. What exactly is the relationship between Garesco, the immortal king, and myself? Why did I transmigrate into this world? Why are there so many gods suppressed here? Why is my knowledge of the other world overlapping with that of this world? Many of Lin Li's questions remained unanswered, but obviously no one was coming to answer them now. He had no choice but to put the matter aside reluctantly, and place his focus on this study that was probably left to him by the immortal king. He seemed to have discovered something on the desk where Garesco had been seated just now. Lin Li hurriedly walked up, and saw that all there was left on the table was a piece of paper, on which there were a few simple characters, that were written very casually. Although the characters were very simple, Lin Li recognized at a glance that the characters made up the famous Frankie magic formula, which was extremely famous in Anral. It was said that no one in Anral had been able to prove it so far. Legend had it that Mage Frankie actually wasn't very competent, and had only reached level 8 at the time of his death. However, the magic formula that he left behind, which was named after him, was officially recognized to be the most complex magic formula ever. Since its birth, no one had been able to crack it. Why would Garesco leave behind such a magic formula? Lin Li intuitively felt that this magic formula had probably appeared here for a reason. Perhaps it was just another test that Garesco had left for him. Lin Li didn't think that Garesco was fooling around by leaving such a magic formula that no one had ever deciphered behind in the study. He thought that there had to be a certain connection between the magic formula and the items in the study. Perhaps it was a guide for him to study the magic books. Besides, although Lin Li had only been in Anral for a relatively short period of time, he was aware of the Frankie magic formula. The reason that it was said to be complicated was because the magical theory involved in it was applicable to almost everything in the field of magic. It could be said to encompass a broad range of knowledge, from that of a mage apprentice to that of a sanctuary master. In fact, some had even guessed that the magical theories involved in the Frankie magic formula were not limited to the sanctuary realm, and had probably gone beyond it and into the divine realm. That was also precisely the reason why the magic formula hadn't been deciphered by anyone, even though it had existed in Anral for thousands of years. Apart from Garesco, the three arbitrators of the Supreme Council could be considered the people with the highest attainments in magic in Anral. However, even they couldn't successfully decipher the Frankie magic formula. Hence, the vast majority of mages even called it a crazy idea of a delirious man. Lin Li did not bother explaining anything to anyone, and instead sat in front of the desk with that piece of paper in hand. At the same time, he grabbed a piece of white paper and a goose feather quill beside him. After dipping the quill in ink, he began doing the calculations. Although the magic formula was extremely famous, it was Lin Li's first time thinking about it and doing the algorithms so seriously. As soon as he wrote a few lines on the paper, he frowned immediately and tossed the quill to the side. He then got up and walked towards the bookshelves. A few moments later, he returned to his seat with a magic book that was thick enough to be used as a pillow. He then started flipping through the pages quickly. Lin Li did not inform the people outside, because he initially thought that he wouldn't spend much time on the Frankie magic formula. However, once he was immersed in it, he immediately forgot about the passage of time, as all his attention was focused on the magic formula. He couldn't help himself at all. Holding the thick magic book in one hand and a quill in the other, Lin Li would sometimes feel like he had comprehended something and write a large number of algorithms on the paper. Sometimes, he would dwell on something and frown for a long time. After flipping through the magic book, he tossed it to the side casually, together with a thick stack of drafts that could almost drown someone. Lin Li then stood up again to grab a magic book from the bookshelf before resuming what he had been doing. He flipped through the book and did multiple calculations continuously before tossing them all to the side again.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.